There is a specific, suffocating silence that fills a room when a toxic family realizes they can no longer afford the lies they have been telling. For my mother, that silence cost exactly $42,600. I stood in my attorney's office watching the heavy black leather binder hit the polished mahogany desk with a dull thud. My mother, Patricia, reached for the top sheet of paper. Her perfectly manicured fingers started to shake. The false high society smile she wore like armor melted right off her face. Her knees buckled under the weight of the number printed at the bottom of the page, forcing her to collapse into a rigid leather guest chair. She stared at the itemized legal invoice, her mouth opening and closing, unable to pull enough air into her lungs to scream. Next to her, my father David stood frozen, his eyes darting between the paper and my face, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to apologize and say it was all a joke. I did not blink. I did not offer a single word of comfort. My parents had treated me like a disposable utility my entire life, and they had just received the final bill. Before I tell you how I legally seized my parents' retirement fund to pay for my niece's winter coat, take a moment to like and subscribe to the Intimately Told Stories channel. Let me know your age in the comments and tell me if you have ever had to cut off a toxic relative. To understand how we ended up in that mahogany office, we have to rewind 90 days. My world was structured, measured, and predictable. I lived in a restored 19th century farmhouse in the quiet, rolling green hills of Vermont. The air out here always smelled like damp pine needles and wood smoke. It was a place where people minded their own business and respected boundaries. I was 32 years old, unmarried by choice, and a senior forensic certified public accountant. My entire career revolved around finding hidden truths inside layers of deceptive numbers. I tracked missing funds. I exposed corporate fraud. I lived by spreadsheets logic and undeniable proof. It was mid-November, the most high-stakes period of my professional year. Quarter 4 corporate audit season was descending, meaning my firm expected me to bill 80-hour weeks. My dining room table was buried under client ledgers, tax compliance forms, and cold cups of black coffee. I needed silence. I needed routine. I needed the fortress of my farmhouse to remain untouched. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, staring out the kitchen window, at the frost creeping across the bare maple trees in my front yard. The sky was an unforgiving, bruised shade of gray. The silence of the morning broke with the harsh, sudden crunch of tires tearing up my gravel driveway. A silver luxury SUV parked at an awkward angle, nearly crushing my mailbox. I recognized the license plate immediately. My stomach tightened, a familiar cold knot forming behind my ribs. My parents never drove 3 hours north to visit me unless they needed something, or unless they were covering up a disaster for my 35-year-old brother Carter. The driver's side door slammed shut, echoing through the quiet valley. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. The porcelain clicked sharply against the stone. I walked toward the front door, bracing myself for the storm that was about to walk into my carefully constructed life. I opened the heavy oak door just as my mother's designer leather boots hit the gravel. The biting November wind whipped across the porch, carrying the sharp, metallic scent of impending snow. Patricia did not walk toward me with the warmth of a mother visiting her daughter. She marched with the frantic, calculated pace of a woman executing a hit and run. My father, David, flanked her, pulling 2 matching hard-shell suitcases from the trunk of their silver Lexus. Standing behind them, looking like 2 misplaced porcelain dolls in the harsh Vermont weather, were my 6-year-old niece and nephew, Mason and Harper, Carter's twins. My breath plumed in the freezing air. Patricia pushed the children up the front steps, her grip tight on their small shoulders. I looked from the kids to the suitcases, my forensic brain already calculating the variables of this sudden intrusion. "We are in a rush, Catherine," my mother said, not bothering with a greeting. Her breath smelled faintly of stale coffee and panic. Carter's in crisis. He booked a red-eye flight out of JFK this morning. I crossed my arms, feeling the bitter cold seep through my wool sweater. Crisis? I asked, keeping my voice flat. Did the crypto market crash again? Or did he just miss a car payment? David dropped the suitcases onto the wooden deck boards with a heavy thud. Do not start with your cynical attitude today, he warned, refusing to meet my eyes. He stared at the frosted mailbox instead. Your brother is undergoing severe burnout. He needs time to heal. He is flying to Bali for a 3-month spiritual awakening. I stared at them. A 3-month spiritual awakening in Indonesia, while I was standing here looking at his 6-year-old children abandoned on a frozen porch. The sheer audacity of the excuse hung in the icy air, suffocating and thick. Carter had spent his entire adult life bouncing from one funded delusion to the next, always financed by my parents and their blind devotion. But dumping human beings onto my doorstep was a new metric of dysfunction. You cannot just leave 2 children here, I said, my tone remaining dangerously even. I am in the middle of corporate audit season. I work 12-hour days. Patricia scoffed, waving her hand dismissively, as if my career was a cute little hobby. Oh, please, Catherine. You work from home on a computer. You can easily watch them while you type. Besides, it is your duty to step up for this family. She turned back toward the SUV, her heels crunching into the gravel. You have no life anyway. You can use the company. Before I could form another sentence, David was already behind the wheel. The engine roared to life. Patricia slammed the passenger door and the Lexus tires spun, kicking up a spray of frozen dirt as they peeled out of my driveway. They sped down the rural road, fleeing the scene of their own crime, leaving nothing behind but the exhaust fumes, dissolving into the gray sky. I did not scream. I did not run down the driveway waving my arms. Panic is an emotion reserved for people who do not know how to build a contingency plan. Instead, I looked down at Mason and Harper. They stood still, clutching each other's hands. Their small noses were bright red from the biting wind. I inspected what they were wearing. Carter had dressed them in paper-thin, tan designer windbreakers covered in repeating luxury logos. The jackets probably cost $400 each, yet they offered zero actual warmth. They were garments designed for social media photos in a heated shopping mall, not for surviving a rural Northeast winter. The jackets were the perfect physical manifestation of my brother's parenting style, entirely focused on superficial image and utterly devoid of practical protection. Harper shivered a full-body tremor that rattled her tiny frame. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes wide with uncertainty. "Are we staying here, Aunt Katie?" she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustling maple branches. I crouched down to their eye level, forcing my expression to soften. "Yes, sweetie, you are going to stay with me for a little while. Let us get inside where it is warm." I ushered them through the front door, shutting the cold out behind us. The farmhouse was quiet, smelling of roasted coffee and the cedar logs burning in the stone fireplace. I guided them to the plush rug near the hearth and helped them peel off those ridiculous, useless designer jackets. Their little hands were like ice. I grabbed a thick wool blanket from the sofa and draped it over their shoulders, instructing them to sit close to the fire, while I went into the kitchen to warm up some milk. As the milk heated on the stove, the shock of the situation began to settle, morphing into a cold, clinical focus. My parents had just crossed a moral threshold. They assumed I would absorb the burden. They assumed I would play the role of the dutiful, invisible daughter, sacrificing my career, my time, and my finances to facilitate my brother's endless narcissism. They assumed my silence meant compliance. They miscalculated. I walked back into the living room and handed the kids 2 warm mugs. "Drink this," I said softly. "I need to do a quick chore on the computer. I will be right back." I walked over to the front window and glanced up at the corner of the porch ceiling. A small black dome rested unobtrusively against the white painted wood. It was a high-resolution, audio-enabled security camera. I had installed the surveillance system 2 years ago, after Carter developed a habit of driving up to my house unannounced while I was out and walking away with my delivered packages. He always claimed he thought they were gifts intended for him. The camera was my silent witness to his entitlement. Today, it was something much more valuable. I sat down at my heavy oak dining table, pushing aside a stack of corporate tax ledgers. I opened my personal laptop and accessed the security system's cloud dashboard. I found the timestamp from 10 minutes ago. I hit play. The footage was crystal clear. Every word my mother shouted echoed through my laptop speakers. The audio captured the exact moment Patricia declared I had no life, the exact moment they refused to take the children back, and the exact sound of their tires fleeing the property. I exported the video file, labeling it with the date and the word abandonment. Next, I opened a fresh web browser. I went straight to an outdoor outfitter website. I found 2 heavy-duty, unbranded, waterproof down parkas rated for sub-zero temperatures. I added thermal socks, insulated waterproof boots, and fleece-lined mittens to the cart. I selected overnight shipping. The total came out to $487.12. I pulled out my credit card and finalized the purchase. The kids would have real protection by tomorrow afternoon. I did not close the laptop. Instead, I opened my spreadsheet software. In my line of work, a forensic accountant treats every hidden asset and every stolen dollar as a piece of a larger puzzle. You document the flow of resources. You quantify the damage. You hold the responsible parties accountable with irrefutable data. If my family wanted to treat my home like a free boarding school, they were going to operate under my billing structure. I created a new secure folder on my encrypted hard drive. I titled it Carter Accountability. Inside, I opened a blank ledger. I typed the date in the first column. In the second column, I wrote the description, Emergency Winter Clothing Procurement. In the third column, I entered the exact cost. I stared at the blinking cursor for a moment, listening to the soft crackle of the fireplace and the quiet murmurs of the 2 abandoned children sitting on my rug. My parents thought they could dump their responsibilities on my doorstep and drive away without consequence. They thought they held all the power because they always had. I added a 4th column to the spreadsheet. I titled it Hazard Pay. I typed in a flat fee of $1,000 for the unannounced driveway ambush. The trap was officially set. The ledger was open. But I had no idea just how deep their deception ran until the following Monday, when I tried to enroll the twins in the local elementary school and discovered the terrifying lengths my parents had gone to in order to keep their golden child safe from reality. There is a specific, suffocating silence that fills a room when a toxic family realizes they can no longer afford the lies they have been telling. For my mother, that silence cost exactly $42,600. I stood in my attorney's office, watching the heavy black leather binder hit the polished mahogany desk with a dull thud. My mother, Patricia, reached for the top sheet of paper. Her perfectly manicured fingers started to shake. The false, high society smile she wore like armor melted right off her face. Her knees buckled under the weight of the number printed at the bottom of the page, forcing her to collapse into a rigid leather guest chair. She stared at the itemized legal invoice, her mouth opening and closing, unable to pull enough air into her lungs to scream. Next to her, my father David stood frozen, his eyes darting between the paper and my face, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to apologize and say it was all a joke. I did not blink. I did not offer a single word of comfort. My parents had treated me like a disposable utility my entire life, and they had just received the final bill. Before I tell you how I legally seized my parents' retirement fund to pay for my niece's winter coat, take a moment to like and subscribe to the Intimately Told Stories channel. Let me know your age in the comments and tell me if you have ever had to cut off a toxic relative. To understand how we ended up in that mahogany office, we have to rewind 90 days. My world was structured, measured, and predictable. I lived in a restored 19th century farmhouse in the quiet, rolling green hills of Vermont. The air out here always smelled like damp pine needles and wood smoke. It was a place where people minded their own business and respected boundaries. I was 32 years old, unmarried by choice, and a senior forensic certified public accountant. My entire career revolved around finding hidden truths inside layers of deceptive numbers. I tracked missing funds. I exposed corporate fraud. I lived by spreadsheets logic and undeniable proof. It was mid-November, the most high-stakes period of my professional year. Quarter 4 corporate audit season was descending, meaning my firm expected me to bill 80-hour weeks. My dining room table was buried under client ledgers, tax compliance forms, and cold cups of black coffee. I needed silence. I needed routine. I needed the fortress of my farmhouse to remain untouched. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, staring out the kitchen window at the frost creeping across the bare maple trees in my front yard. The sky was an unforgiving, bruised shade of gray. The silence of the morning broke with the harsh, sudden crunch of tires tearing up my gravel driveway. A silver luxury SUV parked at an awkward angle, nearly crushing my mailbox. I recognized the license plate immediately. My stomach tightened, a familiar cold knot forming behind my ribs. My parents never drove 3 hours north to visit me unless they needed something, or unless they were covering up a disaster for my 35-year-old brother Carter. The driver's side door slammed shut, echoing through the quiet valley. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. The porcelain clicked sharply against the stone. I walked toward the front door, bracing myself for the storm that was about to walk into my carefully constructed life. I opened the heavy oak door just as my mother's designer leather boots hit the gravel. The biting November wind whipped across the porch, carrying the sharp, metallic scent of impending snow. Patricia did not walk toward me with the warmth of a mother visiting her daughter. She marched with the frantic, calculated pace of a woman executing a hit and run. My father David flanked her, pulling 2 matching hard-shell suitcases from the trunk of their silver Lexus. Standing behind them, looking like 2 misplaced porcelain dolls in the harsh Vermont weather, were my 6-year-old niece and nephew, Mason and Harper, Carter's twins. My breath plumed in the freezing air. Patricia pushed the children up the front steps, her grip tight on their small shoulders. I looked from the kids to the suitcases, my forensic brain already calculating the variables of this sudden intrusion. "We are in a rush, Catherine," my mother said, not bothering with a greeting. Her breath smelled faintly of stale coffee and panic. "Carter is in crisis. He booked a red-eye flight out of JFK this morning." I crossed my arms, feeling the bitter cold seep through my wool sweater. "Crisis?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "Did the crypto market crash again? Or did he just miss a car payment?" David dropped the suitcases onto the wooden deck boards with a heavy thud. "Do not start with your cynical attitude today," he warned, refusing to meet my eyes. He stared at the frosted mailbox instead. "Your brother is undergoing severe burnout. He needs time to heal. He is flying to Bali for a 3-month spiritual awakening." I stared at them. A 3-month spiritual awakening in Indonesia. While I was standing here, looking at his 6-year-old children abandoned on a frozen porch. The sheer audacity of the excuse hung in the icy air, suffocating and thick. Carter had spent his entire adult life bouncing from one funded delusion to the next, always financed by my parents and their blind devotion. But dumping human beings onto my doorstep was a new metric of dysfunction. "You cannot just leave 2 children here," I said, my tone remaining dangerously even. "I am in the middle of corporate audit season. I work 12-hour days." Patricia scoffed, waving her hand dismissively as if my career was a cute little hobby. Oh, please, Catherine. You work from home on a computer. You can easily watch them while you type. Besides, it is your duty to step up for this family. She turned back toward the SUV, her heels crunching into the gravel. You have no life anyway. You can use the company. Before I could form another sentence, David was already behind the wheel. The engine roared to life. Patricia slammed the passenger door, and the Lexus tires spun, kicking up a spray of frozen dirt as they peeled out of my driveway. They sped down the rural road, fleeing the scene of their own crime, leaving nothing behind but the exhaust fumes dissolving into the gray sky. I did not scream. I did not run down the driveway waving my arms. Panic is an emotion reserved for people who do not know how to build a contingency plan. Instead, I looked down at Mason and Harper, clutching each other's hands. Their small noses were bright red from the biting wind. I inspected what they were wearing. Carter had dressed them in paper-thin tan designer windbreakers, covered in repeating luxury logos. The jackets probably cost $400 each, yet they offered zero actual warmth. They were garments designed for social media photos in a heated shopping mall, not for surviving a rural Northeast winter. The jackets were the perfect physical manifestation of my brother's parenting style, entirely focused on superficial image and utterly devoid of practical protection. Harper shivered a full-bodied tremor that rattled her tiny frame. She looked up at me on her big brown eyes wide with uncertainty. "Are we staying here, Aunt Katie?" she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustling maple branches. I crouched down to their eye level, forcing my expression to soften. "Yes, sweetie, you are going to stay with me for a little while. Let us get inside where it is warm." I ushered them through the front door, shutting the cold out behind us. The farmhouse was quiet, smelling of roasted coffee and the cedar logs burning in the stone fireplace. I guided them to the plush rug near the hearth and helped them peel off those ridiculous, useless designer jackets. Their little hands were like ice. I grabbed a thick wool blanket from the sofa and draped it over their shoulders, instructing them to sit close to the fire, while I went into the kitchen to warm up some milk. As the milk heated on the stove, the shock of the situation began to settle, morphing into a cold, clinical focus. My parents had just crossed a moral threshold. They assumed I would absorb the burden. They assumed I would play the role of the dutiful, invisible daughter, sacrificing my career, my time, and my finances to facilitate my brother's endless narcissism. They assumed my silence meant compliance. They miscalculated. I walked back into the living room and handed the kids 2 warm mugs. "Drink this," I said softly. "I need to do a quick chore on the computer. I will be right back." I walked over to the front window and glanced up at the corner of the porch ceiling. A small black dome rested unobtrusively against the white painted wood. It was a high-resolution, audio-enabled security camera. I had installed the surveillance system 2 years ago, after Carter developed a habit of driving up to my house unannounced while I was out, and walking away with my delivered packages. He always claimed he thought they were gifts intended for him. The camera was my silent witness to his entitlement. Today it was something much more valuable. I sat down at my heavy oak dining table, pushing aside a stack of corporate tax ledgers. I opened my personal laptop and accessed the security system's cloud dashboard. I found the timestamp from 10 minutes ago. I hit play. The footage was crystal clear. Every word my mother shouted echoed through my laptop speakers. The audio captured the exact moment Patricia declared I had no life, the exact moment they refused to take the children back, and the exact sound of their tires fleeing the property. I exported the video file, labeling it with the date and the word abandonment. Next, I opened a fresh web browser. I went straight to an Outdoor Outfitter website. I found 2 heavy-duty, unbranded, waterproof down parkas rated for sub-zero temperatures. I added thermal socks, insulated waterproof boots, and fleece-lined mittens to the cart. I selected overnight shipping. The total came out to $487.12. I pulled out my credit card and finalized the purchase. The kids would have real protection by tomorrow afternoon. I did not close the laptop. Instead, I opened my spreadsheet software. In my line of work, a forensic accountant treats every hidden asset and every stolen dollar as a piece of a larger puzzle. You document the flow of resources. You quantify the damage. You hold the responsible parties accountable with irrefutable data. If my family wanted to treat my home like a free boarding school, they were going to operate under my billing structure. I created a new secure folder on my encrypted hard drive. I titled it Carter Accountability. Inside, I opened a blank ledger. I typed the date in the first column. In the second column, I wrote the description, Emergency Winter Clothing Procurement. In the third column, I entered the exact cost. I stared at the blinking cursor for a moment, listening to the soft crackle of the fireplace and the quiet murmurs of the two abandoned children sitting on my rug. My parents thought they could dump their responsibilities on my doorstep and drive away without consequence. They thought they held all the power because they always had. I added a fourth column to the spreadsheet. I titled it Hazard Pay. I typed in a flat fee of $1,000 for the unannounced driveway ambush. The trap was officially set. The ledger was open. But I had no idea just how deep their deception ran until the following Monday, when I tried to enroll the twins in the local elementary school and discovered the terrifying lengths my parents had gone to in order to keep their golden child safe from reality. By Monday morning, the reality of my situation had settled into my bones like the biting Vermont frost. The heavy down parkas and insulated boots I ordered had arrived on my porch right on schedule. I bundled Mason and Harper into the warm layers, noting how their small frames seemed to relax slightly under the comforting weight of real winter gear. I fed them warm oatmeal and buckled them into the back seat of my car. My corporate audit deadlines were looming. I could not afford to put my career on hold, nor did I want to. I needed a structured environment for the twins during the day. The local elementary school, a brick building nestled between two rolling hills, just 10 minutes from my farmhouse, was the obvious solution. I had spent Sunday evening drafting a temporary guardianship letter, gathering my tax records to prove residency, and printing out their medical histories, which I had to pressure their former pediatrician to release to me. I walked into the school administrative office holding the twins by the hand. The room smelled of fresh floor wax and construction paper. I approached the front desk and introduced myself to the school principal, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Gable, who wore a thick-knit cardigan. I handed her my driver's license and the thick folder of enrollment documents, explaining the sudden change in family circumstances. Mrs. Gable offered a sympathetic smile and took the paperwork. She instructed the twins to sit at a nearby coloring station while she processed the request. I leaned against the counter, mentally running through my afternoon work schedule, calculating how many hours of billable time I could salvage before school pickup. The rhythmic clicking of the computer keyboard stopped. Mrs. Gable frowned, pushing her reading glasses further up her nose. She clicked her mouse a few more times, her brow furrowing deep in confusion. "Ms. Werner," she said, her voice dropping to a confused whisper. "I am looking at the district database. Mason and Harper are already enrolled in our system." I stood up straight. My heart skipped a single distinct beat. I gripped the edge of the laminate counter. "That is impossible," I replied. "They just arrived in the state 48 hours ago. I have not signed any enrollment forms." Mrs. Gable turned her monitor slightly toward me. "They were registered via our online portal exactly 3 weeks ago," she explained. "We received the completed residency affidavits and guardianship waivers signed by you. We were actually expecting them to start class this morning." A cold wave of adrenaline flooded my veins. The forensic accountant inside me woke up sharp and scanning for discrepancies. 3 weeks ago. My parents had told me Carter's trip to Bali was a sudden, unpredictable crisis. That was a lie. They had been planning this abandonment for nearly a month. I kept my face perfectly still. "May I see the documents that were submitted to the school?" I asked, keeping my tone professional and detached. "I believe there has been a clerical error regarding my signature." Mrs. Gable walked over to the office printer. The machine hummed and spat out 4 sheets of paper. She handed them across the counter. I stared down at the state residency affidavit. There on the bottom right corner was my name. It was signed in blue ink, but the handwriting was wrong. The loops on the letters were forced stiff and mimicking my professional signature with clumsy hesitation. It was a textbook forgery, executed by someone who had seen me sign checks but lacked the muscle memory to replicate the fluid motion. I flipped to the second page. To enroll a student in the district, the school required 2 proofs of physical residency. Attached to the fraudulent guardianship form was a scanned copy of my Green Mountain Power electric bill. It was my actual bill, displaying my full name and service address, dated from the 2nd week of August. My mind raced backward. In August, my parents had driven up to Vermont for a brief, uncomfortable weekend visit. I remembered coming home from a grocery run and seeing my father standing near the mailbox at the end of my driveway. He had claimed he was just enjoying the scenery. He was not enjoying the scenery. He was stealing my mail. I looked up at Mrs. Gable. She was watching me closely, sensing the deep irregularity of the situation. I did not want to involve the school principal in a criminal dispute, nor did I want the twins to feel the stigma of a police investigation on their very first day. "This signature is not mine," I told her quietly. "My parents submitted this paperwork without my knowledge. However, the children are indeed living with me now, and they need to be in class. I will sign fresh, authentic documents right now in your presence." Mrs. Gable nodded slowly, recognizing the quiet gravity in my voice. She handed me a new pen. I signed the authentic forms, watched her stamp them, and kissed the twins on their foreheads before leaving them in the care of their new teachers. I walked out of the brick building and climbed into the driver's seat of my car. I did not turn the key in the ignition. I sat in the freezing vehicle, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. This was no longer just a toxic family dynamic. This was no longer just an arrogant mother and an enabling father overstepping boundaries. They had stolen federal mail from my mailbox. They had fabricated legal guardianship documents. They had committed documented, undeniable identity fraud. They had weaponized my identity to facilitate their golden child's tropical vacation. I opened my laptop right there in the school parking lot. I accessed my encrypted Carter accountability folder. I logged a new entry into the spreadsheet. I documented the forged signatures. I documented the stolen utility bill. I detailed the dates and the methods of the fraud. My parents thought they were clever. They thought I was too passive, too obsessed with keeping the peace, to ever scrutinize their methods. They forgot that tracking financial deception and paper trails was exactly what people paid me hundreds of dollars an hour to do. I drove home and threw myself into my corporate audits, channeling my simmering rage into relentless productivity. By the time I picked the twins up from school, the sun was already dipping below the tree line, casting long, dark shadows across the snow. That evening, I stood in the kitchen preparing dinner. Mason and Harper were sitting at the island counter, coloring quietly on some scrap paper I had provided. They were well behaved, almost unnervingly so. They rarely asked for toys. They rarely spoke above a whisper. I turned toward the sink to wash a few vegetables. As I pivoted, my elbow caught the edge of a heavy stainless steel serving spoon resting on the drying rack. The spoon clattered off the counter and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, piercing ring. It was a trivial sound, a common kitchen accident. But the reaction it provoked was terrifying. Behind me, I heard a sudden, sharp intake of breath. I turned around. Both children had dropped their crayons. Mason had his arms thrown protectively over his head, his shoulders hunched up to his ears. Harper had slid entirely off her stool, pressing her small back against the base cabinets, her hands covering her face. They were trembling. It was not a jump of surprise, it was a visceral, conditioned flinch of pure terror. I froze. The kitchen went dead silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. It took them several long seconds to realize no one was screaming. No one was slamming doors. No one was coming to punish them for a loud noise. Slowly, Mason lowered his arms. Harper peeked through her fingers, her breathing shallow and ragged. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the spilled water on the floor. I kept my distance, making sure my hands were visible and open. "It was just a spoon," I said softly, keeping my voice as gentle as possible. "Just a clumsy mistake. You are safe here. No one is going to yell. No one is going to hurt you." Mason swallowed hard, climbing back onto his stool. Harper wiped a silent tear from her cheek and picked up her green crayon, her little fingers still shaking. I stood up, turning my back to them so they could not see the fury burning in my eyes. Carter's superficial social media posts portrayed him as an enlightened spiritual father. He posted photos of the twins on expensive beaches and in luxury cafes. But that sudden, violent flinch told a much darker story. It spoke of a household ruled by unpredictable anger, explosive tempers, and profound emotional neglect. Carter had broken these children, and my parents had funded the hammer. Staring at the stainless steel spoon on the floor, my resolve hardened into impenetrable steel. I was no longer just billing my parents for a winter coat. I was going to build an ironclad legal wall around these children. I was going to sever Carter's rights and strip my parents of their power, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. I picked up the spoon and set it quietly on the counter. Just as I turned back to the stove, my cell phone illuminated on the kitchen island. An incoming call from an unknown local number flashed across the screen. I did not know it yet, but my mother had just discovered that I was planning to hire a nanny to cover my audit hours, and she was already maneuvering her next attack. She was about to introduce a threat so vile it would force me to stop playing defense and start setting traps. The unknown local number flashing on my kitchen island was not an immediate threat. It was my salvation. I picked up the phone, taking a deep breath to steady my racing pulse after the incident with the dropped spoon. On the other end of the line was Emily. I had spent my brief lunch break earlier that day frantically calling local childcare agencies, pulling favors from a colleague who had deep ties in the community. Emily was a 24-year-old graduate student pursuing a degree in early childhood education. She possessed immaculate references, an updated background check, and pediatric first aid certification. She was also available immediately. Her rate was $30 an hour. I did not negotiate. I hired her on the spot and asked her to start the very next afternoon. When Emily arrived at my farmhouse, she brought a quiet, stabilizing energy. She wore a thick knit sweater and carried a tote bag filled with age-appropriate board games and watercolor paints. Mason and Harper were initially hesitant, clinging to the fabric of my trousers, but Emily did not rush them. She sat on the floor, unpacked her paints, and simply waited. Within 20 minutes, Harper was painting a jagged green tree, and Mason was quietly sorting through a pile of wooden blocks. I retreated to my home office, shutting the heavy French doors. I needed to dive back into my corporate audits. The fiscal quarter was ending, and my firm required perfection. I sat at my desk, dual monitors glowing with endless columns of financial data, but my mind kept drifting to the newly created ledger on my encrypted hard drive. I logged Emily's hourly rate into the spreadsheet. $30 an hour, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. $750 a week just to keep my career afloat while raising my brother's abandoned children? The peace in my household lasted exactly 3 days. It was Thursday afternoon. Emily had taken the twins to the backyard to collect pine cones. I was deep in a complex tax reconciliation when my cell phone vibrated across the wooden surface of my desk. I glanced down. The caller identification displayed my mother's name, Patricia. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. My parents had not contacted me since peeling out of my driveway. They had not called to check if the children were eating, if they were sleeping, or if they were safe. They only called when they wanted to exert control. I did not answer the phone right away. Instead, I opened a high-fidelity audio recording application on my desktop computer. In the state of Vermont, the law requires only one party to consent to the recording of a conversation. I was that one party. I routed my cell phone audio through my computer speakers, hit the red record button on the screen, and answered the call. "Hello, Mother," I said, keeping my tone mild and unbothered. "Who is the girl in the yellow coat?" Catherine Patricia snapped. Her voice was shrill, echoing through my office speakers with a sharp, metallic edge. I paused, my fingers hovering over my keyboard. The girl in the yellow coat. Emily owned a bright yellow raincoat. I realized instantly what had happened. Emily had posted a harmless photo of a snowy Vermont landscape on her public social media page, likely tagging our small town. Patricia, who spent her days meticulously curating her own online image, had been stalking digital footprints. "That is Emily," I replied evenly. "She is a highly vetted professional nanny. She watches the twins in the afternoons so I can finish my audit reports." "You gave your own flesh and blood to a stranger?" Patricia gasped, her tone dripping with manufactured outrage. "You pawned your family off to some random girl you found on the internet. How dare you? Those children are fragile. They need their family, not hired help." "They needed their family on Monday morning, when you dumped them on a freezing porch," I stated, refusing to raise my voice. "I have a demanding career. I cannot monitor two traumatized children while untangling corporate tax fraud. Emily is a necessity." "Your career is just numbers on a screen," Patricia sneered. "It means nothing. Carter is out there finding his soul, and you cannot even step up to mother his children. You need to call your firm and resign today. You will watch them full-time. That is your role." The sheer magnitude of her delusion filled the room. She genuinely expected me to throw away a lucrative, hard-earned career to provide free labor for my negligent brother. "I will not be resigning," I said. "Emily stays." There was a tense, hollow silence on the line. I could hear Patricia breathing heavily, the sound of her calculating her next strike. When she spoke again, her voice dropped into a low, venomous register. "If you do not fire that girl and quit your job by tomorrow, I will call Child Protective Services," Patricia threatened. My eyes locked onto the recording timer, counting upward on my monitor. "I will call the state," she continued, emboldened by my silence. "I will tell the authorities that you are neglecting Carter's children. I will tell them you leave them alone with unvetted strangers, that you work too much to feed them properly. They will launch an investigation. They will show up at your pristine little farmhouse and drag your name through the mud. Do you think your prestigious accounting firm will keep you on staff when you are under investigation for child endangerment?" She was weaponizing the state against me. She was willing to traumatize her own grandchildren with a government raid just to force me into submission. A lesser person would have screamed. A lesser person would have hurled insults, defended their character, and hung up the phone in a fit of rage. But I was a forensic auditor. I did not deal in emotions. I dealt in evidence. And right now, the woman on the other end of the line was handing me a loaded weapon. I just needed her to pull the trigger on the record. I switched gears. I let my shoulders drop, closed my eyes, and forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I channeled every ounce of stress, every late night, every moment of genuine fear I had felt for the twins, and I pushed it into my vocal cords. "Mom, please," I whimpered, letting my voice crack perfectly on the final syllable. Oh, now you are crying? Patricia mocked. Her tone brightened, soaring with the sadistic thrill of a predator tasting fear. Please do not do this, I begged, pitching my voice higher, making myself sound small, terrified, and overwhelmed. I am trying my best. I did not ask for this. You left them here. You drove away. I have no legal paperwork. If you call the state, they will take them away into foster care. They will take them away unless you do exactly what I tell you. Patricia gloated, taking the bait entirely. You owe this family, Catherine. You have always been selfish. We left them on your porch because you have no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities. You had no choice but to take them. Now you will quit your job, you will raise them until Carter is healed, and you will do it without complaining. If you disobey me, I will make that phone call and ruin your pristine little life. Do you understand me? She had just explicitly admitted to abandoning minors against my will. She had explicitly admitted to using extortion to force me into unpaid labor. She had detailed a false report she planned to file with government authorities. I let a pathetic, trembling sob escape my lips. I understand, I whispered. Good, Patricia said sharply. Fire the nanny. She terminated the call. The dial tone echoed through my office. I sat up straight. The trembling in my shoulders ceased instantly. The tears evaporated. My breathing returned to a slow, measured rhythm. I reached out and clicked the stop button on my recording software. I played the final 30 seconds back, listening to Patricia's cruel, triumphant voice, confessing to everything I needed. I exported the file, labeling it Extortion and Abandonment Confession. I dragged the audio file into the encrypted Carter Accountability folder, nesting it right beneath the spreadsheet. My mother thought she had broken me. She thought she had established absolute dominance by threatening my career and my home. She had no idea she had just handed me the legal ammunition required to strip her of her grandparental rights forever. I opened the financial ledger again. The costs were mounting. Beyond a nanny, there were organic groceries to buy, proper winter bedding to purchase, and a looming pediatric appointment I had scheduled to address Harper's persistent cough. The financial bleed was accelerating at a frightening pace. I stared at the blinking cursor next to the total sum. Childcare and basic necessities were draining my disposable income, but my parents were retired. They lived on a fixed pension. Yet they had just funded 2 first-class international plane tickets to Indonesia for Carter and his girlfriend. They were paying for a luxury tropical villa. Where was the money coming from? My eyes drifted to my wallet sitting on the corner of my desk. A cold, distinct prickle of dread washed down the back of my neck. I realized I was fighting a financial war against people who had already proven they were willing to commit federal identity fraud to get what they wanted. I had stopped them from using my name at the elementary school, but I had not checked the foundation of my own financial security. I reached for my wallet, pulling out my primary identification cards. I needed to run a hard inquiry on my own credit report immediately. I was about to uncover a theft so profound it would escalate this family dispute into a devastating federal crime. 30 days. That is how long Mason and Harper had been sleeping in the spare bedroom of my farmhouse. 1 full month of packing school lunches, coordinating afternoon schedules with Emily, and watching my checking account drain like a punctured fuel tank. Raising children is expensive. Raising children whose parents treated their health as an afterthought is a financial hemorrhage. The costs compounded daily. There were organic groceries to buy, because Mason suffered from a sensitive stomach that Carter always ignored, preferring to feed him cheap fast food to save time. There were co-pays for the pediatrician to update their missing vaccination records. Emily was earning $30 an hour, 5 days a week, costing me over $1,000 every single week, just so I could maintain my corporate audit schedule. The financial toll was climbing steadily into the thousands, but the true cost of my brother's negligence did not reveal itself until a quiet Tuesday evening. Harper sat at the dining table, staring down at a plate of roasted chicken and soft carrots. She had not taken a single bite. She pressed her small hand against her right cheek, her eyes welling with silent tears. She did not whine or complain. She had been conditioned to suffer in silence, knowing that speaking up in her previous household usually resulted in being yelled at for causing a disruption. I knelt beside her chair and gently moved her hand. Her cheek was swollen, radiating a dull heat against my palm. I grabbed a small flashlight from the kitchen drawer and asked her to open her mouth. The moment the beam of light hit her back molars, my stomach turned. I drove her to an emergency pediatric dentist the very next morning, leaving Mason at school and pushing 2 crucial client meetings to the afternoon. The clinic smelled of sterile cotton and artificial bubblegum. Dr. Evans, a kind man with gentle hands, took a series of digital x-rays. He called me into the consultation room, pointing a silver pen at the illuminated screen on the wall. He showed me 4 distinct dark shadows eating into the bright white enamel of Harper's teeth. One cavity had progressed so deep it was pressing directly against the nerve. Dr. Evans explained that this level of decay did not happen overnight. It was the result of months, perhaps years, of dietary neglect and a total lack of basic oral hygiene. Carter and Lauren had been too busy staging photographs in luxury cafes to teach their daughter how to hold a toothbrush. The treatment plan required immediate pediatric dental surgery. Harper needed 2 extractions, 2 stainless steel crowns, and intensive nerve therapy. Because my parents had dumped the children without providing any medical insurance cards, the clinic required payment upfront before they would administer the anesthesia. The receptionist handed me a printed invoice. $3,240. I did not hesitate. I pulled my debit card from my wallet and handed it across the counter. But as the plastic card slid into the chip reader, a ghost from my past sent a cold shiver down my spine. Standing in that brightly lit medical office, I was suddenly transported 14 years back in time. I was 18 years old. I had just graduated high school. While my peers spent their summer going to parties and preparing for college orientations, I worked double shifts at a roadside diner. I came home every night, smelling of stale fry grease and bleach, my feet aching so badly I could barely stand in the shower. By mid-August, I had saved exactly $5,000. It was my tuition money. It was my ticket to independence. Then came the phone call at 2 in the morning. Carter, who was 21 at the time, had wrapped his sports car around a steel utility pole. He was intoxicated. The police had him in custody. I remember standing in the dim light of my childhood kitchen. My father, David, pacing the floor, my mother, Patricia, weeping into a paper towel. They needed bail money. They needed a lawyer retainer. Their own credit cards were maxed out from funding Carter's lavish lifestyle. My father turned to me, his face exhausted and stern. He told me they needed my summer savings. I begged them not to take it. I told them I needed it for my textbooks and my dormitory fees. My mother looked at me with an expression of pure disgust, calling me selfish. My father told me it was my duty. Family protects family, he had said. I drove to the bank the next morning and withdrew a cashier's check for $5,000. I handed it over. Carter avoided jail time. I took out high-interest student loans to cover my first semester. That night in the kitchen forged the unspoken rule of my existence. It established the permanent generational pattern of our family structure. I was the bank. Carter was the investment. My parents viewed me entirely as a disposable utility, a silent safety net they could deploy whenever their golden child stumbled. The sharp beep of the dental clinic credit card terminal pulled me back to the present. The receipt printed confirming the transaction. $3,240 gone in an instant. I walked back into the recovery room. Harper was groggy from the medication, clutching a small stuffed bear the nurse had given her. I picked her up, wrapping my arms around her fragile frame. I carried her out to my car, buckling her into her car seat with deliberate care. Driving back to the farmhouse through the winding, snow-lined roads of Vermont, a profound shift occurred inside my mind. I realized I could not just survive this situation. I had to dismantle it. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my days dissecting corrupt businesses, tracking stolen funds, and liquidating compromised assets. My family was operating exactly like a corrupt corporation. They were siphoning resources, committing fraud, and leaving a trail of innocent casualties in their wake. It was time to treat them like one. That evening, after the twins were fast asleep in their beds, I poured a glass of cold water and sat down at my heavy oak desk. I opened the encrypted Carter accountability folder. I stared at the simple spreadsheet I had created a month prior. It was too passive. It was time to formalize the debt. I expanded the columns. I created a master ledger designed to withstand the strict scrutiny of a federal judge. I logged the initial winter clothing purchase. I logged the $1,000 hazard pay for the driveway ambush. I entered Emily's weekly wages down to the exact minute she clocked out. I typed in the grocery totals, itemizing the organic food required to heal Mason's stomach. Then I pulled the crumpled dental receipt from my pocket and entered the $3,240. The subtotal was climbing past $8,000, but I was not finished. A bank does not lend money for free. A bank charges for risk. I selected the entire column of expenses and applied a standard corporate penalty. I added an annualized compound interest rate of 8%, calculated daily from the exact moment the funds left my account. Every single day my parents ignored their responsibilities, the invoice would grow heavier. I was building a financial guillotine, and they were willfully placing their necks on the block. The ledger was pristine. The numbers were undeniable. Yet, as I saved the file, my mind kept circling back to a glaring discrepancy. My parents were retired. They lived on a modest fixed pension that barely covered the property taxes on their suburban home. How did two people with zero disposable income purchase first-class international plane tickets to Indonesia? How were they paying for Carter to live in a luxury tropical villa for 3 months? The cold prickle of dread returned, creeping up my spine. When Patricia had threatened to call the state authorities on me, she had sounded too confident, too desperate to maintain control. People who are hiding deep financial secrets always lash out when they feel their foundation slipping. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my leather wallet. I slid my primary identification cards onto the desk. I needed to know exactly how they funded that vacation. I opened a new browser window and navigated to a secure credit monitoring portal. I typed in my social security number, answered the security questions, and initiated a hard inquiry on my own federal credit report. The loading screen spun for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, a bright red, high alert notification flashed across my monitor, illuminating my dark office. The discovery staring back at me was a betrayal so profound it would force me to stop acting as an accountant and start acting as an executioner. The bright crimson banner flashed across the top of my monitor, painting my dark office in a harsh warning light. The digital alert felt like a physical blow striking me right in the center of my chest, stealing the breath from my lungs. I blinked rapidly, leaning closer to the glowing screen, assuming my tired eyes were simply misreading the data. A forensic accountant does not make mistakes with her own personal finances. I lived by the ledger. I checked my banking portals every single Friday without fail. I guarded my social security number with the deep ingrained paranoia of a vault manager. I shredded my mail. I used encrypted passwords. But the numbers staring back at me were not an error. A new line item sat prominently under the Open Accounts tab of my credit monitoring dashboard. It was a premium travel rewards credit card. This was the specific tier of credit issued only to individuals with a flawless 800 score, carrying exorbitant annual fees and virtually no spending limit. The origination date was marked exactly 6 weeks ago. That was mid-October, just weeks before my parents drove up my gravel driveway and abandoned my niece and nephew on my freezing porch. I clicked on the account details. My pulse drummed a heavy, steady rhythm against my eardrums, loud enough to drown out the wind howling against the farmhouse windows. The current balance was staggering: $32,415. I did not own this card. I had never applied for it. I scrolled down to the transaction history, my eyes scanning the itemized merchant codes. 2 international first-class plane tickets from John F. Kennedy Airport to Denpasar, Bali, $8,000 each. A luxury resort booking in the lush hills of Ubud reserved for a 3-month stay, $10,000. High-end luggage purchases from a designer boutique in Manhattan, expensive airport lounge access fees, premium rideshare charges, gourmet dining tabs. This was not a clerical mistake. This was a targeted, deliberate extraction of my financial identity. My parents had not just borrowed an old joint credit card from my college days and maxed it out. They had taken my social security number, my date of birth, and my pristine financial history, and they had forged a brand new application. They had committed felony identity theft to fund my brother's tropical escape. For a fraction of a second, my rigid emotional suppression cracked. A sharp, piercing ache radiated through my ribs, tight and suffocating. These were the people who raised me. These were the people who taught me how to tie my shoes, who attended my middle school science fairs, who stood beside me in graduation photos. They had sat at my dining table, drank my coffee, and smiled at me. And behind those smiles, they were actively plotting to steal my identity. They were willing to saddle me with decades of crippling debt just so Carter could drink coconut cocktails on a white sand beach. They knew my career required spotless financial records. A single defaulted loan or fraud investigation could cost me my CPA license, destroying the life I had built with my own 2 hands. They knew this, and they did it anyway. The ache lasted for perhaps 3 breaths. Then it hardened into a block of ice. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a 0-degree freezing rage. It was a cold, clinical anger, the kind that sharpens the mind, slows down time, and strips away all hesitation. I did not cry. I did not throw my coffee mug against the wall. I reached for my cell phone. While the bank customer service line rang, playing a loop of sterile, muted jazz, my mind began turning over the puzzle pieces. My parents were retired. They lived on a fixed pension, but they owned a large, beautiful suburban home in a desirable neighborhood. They maintained a manicured lawn and projected an image of flawless upper-middle-class stability. They had always managed to scrape together enough cash to bail Carter out of his endless disasters in the past. Why resort to stealing my identity now? Why risk federal prison for plane tickets? People only commit identity theft against their own children when they have exhausted every other legal avenue of credit. Their own credit scores must be ruined. Their liquid assets must be gone. They were hiding a much darker financial secret, something profound enough to force them into desperate criminality. I filed that thought away. I would hunt down their secret soon enough. Right now, I had to stop the financial bleed. A customer service representative answered the phone. Her voice was cheerful, asking how she could assist me tonight. "My name is Catherine Werner," I said, keeping my tone brisk and authoritative. "I am looking at a premium travel rewards card opened under my Social Security number 6 weeks ago. I did not authorize this account. I am reporting it as stolen and fraudulent." The cheerful tone dropped, immediately replaced by practiced corporate urgency. She asked me a series of security questions to verify my identity. I provided my previous addresses, my mother's maiden name, and the make of my first vehicle. Once she unlocked the profile, she asked if I recognized any of the recent transactions in Indonesia. "I do not," I lied smoothly. I am currently sitting in my home in Vermont. I have never been to Bali. I am flagging this account for severe fraud, the representative stated, her keyboard clicking rapidly in the background. I am freezing the line of credit immediately. No further authorizations will process. We will also initiate a federal trace and assign this to our cybercrime division as the application was submitted online. I need formal documentation of this fraud report emailed to me tonight, I instructed. I will be filing a corresponding police report tomorrow morning to begin clearing the balance from my credit profile. The representative assured me the documents were on their way. She canceled the physical card and locked the digital wallet associated with the account. The call ended. I placed my phone face down on the desk. I looked back at the computer monitor. The $32,000 balance was still there, but the status indicator next to the account number had changed from an active green circle to a stark, locked red padlock. I hit print. The laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life, spitting out the transaction history and the confirmation of the fraud freeze. I took a 3-hole punch, pressed down on the warm paper, and snapped the fresh sheets into the heavy black leather binder I was building. The paper trail was growing thicker every day. I leaned back in my chair, staring into the dark woods beyond my office window. Halfway across the world, Carter was currently 14 hours ahead of Eastern Standard Time. It would be dinner time in Bali. He would likely be sitting in an upscale, open-air restaurant, wearing expensive linen, performing his curated spiritual journey for an audience of strangers. He would eat an extravagant meal, order top-shelf liquor, and wait for the server to bring the leather checkbook. He would reach into his pocket and hand over a sleek plastic card bearing my stolen credit line. He had no idea that thousands of miles away, sitting in a quiet, snowy farmhouse, his invisible sister had just silently severed his financial umbilical cord. He was about to learn that when you build your paradise on stolen ground, the eviction notice always comes without warning. The golden child was about to face the one word my parents had shielded him from his entire life. Declined. It was 9 in the evening when the digital notification illuminated my smartphone screen. Carter Werner has started a live video. I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my living room, nursing a cup of herbal tea. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a warm orange hue across the restored hardwood floors. I tapped the alert, allowing the broadcast to fill my display. I was treated to a front-row seat of an impending disaster. Carter occupied a plush velvet booth inside an exclusive open-air dining establishment nestled deep within the Ubud jungle canopy. Tiki torches flickered in the background, illuminating sweeping terraced rice fields. He wore a crisp, unbuttoned white linen shirt, projecting the effortless aura of a wealthy expatriate. A heavy gold chain rested against his collarbone. He leaned into the camera lens, holding a crystal glass of amber liquid, wearing a practiced spiritual smirk. "What is up, my global tribe?" he drawled, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "We are manifesting abundance tonight." He rotated his phone to showcase the extravagant spread covering his teakwood table. There were delicate plates of seared Wagyu beef truffle-infused risotto and a decadent chocolate sphere dusted in edible gold flakes. I did not need an itemized receipt to estimate the cost. It was easily a $1,000 meal, engineered specifically to harvest envy from his online followers. "This is what the crypto nomad lifestyle looks like," he boasted, gesturing to the feast. "You have to break free from the matrix. Stop trading your time for a corporate paycheck. You have to take risks, trust the universe, and let the wealth flow toward you. My energy is aligned with prosperity." The dramatic irony of his performance was almost poetic. Carter was lecturing his audience on financial liberation while chewing food paid for by his sister's stolen identity. Through the screen, I watched a server approach his booth, holding a sleek black leather billfold. Carter did not even look at the man. He maintained eye contact with his digital audience, reaching into his pocket with a casual, practiced flick of the wrist. He pulled out the heavy metallic travel rewards card bearing my stolen credit line. He dropped the plastic onto the leather tray with a sharp, arrogant clack. "Keep vibrating high, everyone," Carter concluded, raising his crystal glass one final time. "The universe always provides." The video feed ended, cutting the screen back to a standard menu. I set my phone face up on the coffee table. I did not move. I just sat in the dim light listening to the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The server was currently walking that metallic card toward a merchant terminal. He would insert the chip. The machine would attempt to establish a secure handshake with the issuing bank in New York. The bank's automated fraud detection software, heavily fortified by the federal freeze I had initiated just hours prior, would instantly reject the request. I counted the seconds in my head. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3. The phone vibrated, shattering the quiet atmosphere of the farmhouse. The caller identification displayed an international number originating from Indonesia. The universe was no longer providing. I picked up the device, tapped the green icon, and held the speaker to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. "Catherine, fix your stupid card right now," Carter hissed. Gone was the enlightened, Zen-like crypto nomad. His voice was frantic, breathless, and laced with naked panic. I could hear the ambient noise of the restaurant in the background, the clinking of silverware, the low hum of wealthy patrons, the soft acoustic guitar playing on a nearby stage. "My plastic is currently resting inside my wallet," I replied, keeping my tone mild and detached. "I am not sure what you are referring to." "Stop playing games," he snapped, his breathing growing ragged. "The waiter just handed it back to me in front of the entire dining room. It declined. It is embarrassing." "Call your bank and authorize the overseas charge. Mom and Dad said they set this up through your profile because their limits were too low. Just clear the fraud alert. I need to pay this tab." The sheer entitlement was staggering. He openly admitted to knowing the account was fraudulent, yet he demanded I facilitate the crime just to save him from a moment of social discomfort. "I did call the bank," I stated smoothly, taking a slow sip of my herbal tea. "I called them 3 hours ago. I informed their fraud department that someone stole my social security number to open a high-limit account. They permanently locked the line and forwarded the originating IP address to their cybercrime division." A thick, suffocating silence fell over the international connection. The reality of his situation was settling into his pristine, linen-clad shoulders. He was thousands of miles away from home, sitting in a foreign country, holding a useless piece of metal, staring down a 4-figure dinner bill with 0 actual currency to his name. "You reported it as stolen?" he asked, his voice trembling, teetering on the edge of a total meltdown. "Are you insane? You know I am over here. You know I need those funds to survive. You just stranded me on an island." "I did not strand you," I corrected. "You stranded your 6-year-old children on my frozen porch with no winter coats, no health insurance, and 0 warning. You funded your spiritual retreat by committing felony identity theft. I simply closed the vault." The panic in his chest curdled into a vicious, desperate anger. He realized tears and guilt trips would not sway me. He resorted to the only weapon cowardly men possess when cornered. "I will ruin you for this," he snarled, dropping any pretense of brotherly affection. "I will go online tonight. I will flood your prestigious little CPA firm with fake reviews. I will call your senior partners and tell them you are unstable. I will tell them you stole my kids and locked me out of my own trust fund. I will destroy your career before sunrise. Do you hear me, Catherine?" I smiled into the darkness of my living room. Threats only work when the target has something to lose. I held every single piece of leverage. "You are welcome to try," I responded, my voice dropping an octave, radiating cold authority. But before you dial, my senior partners, you should check your email. I just sent a certified digital invoice to your inbox, copying our parents." "What invoice?" he demanded, the confusion briefly overriding his rage. "The bill for your negligence," I explained. "It includes premium childcare, emergency pediatric dental surgery to fix Harper's rotting molars, organic groceries, and a hazard fee for the driveway ambush. With the standard corporate interest rate applied, your current outstanding balance is $21,400. "Are you out of your mind?" he shouted, causing the audio to clip and distort. "I am not paying you a single dime for babysitting." "You are not paying me anything right now," I agreed, "because your card just declined. Enjoy washing dishes to cover that Wagyu beef." I pulled the phone away from my ear, tapping the red button to sever the connection mid-sentence. The silence returned to the farmhouse, deeper and more satisfying than before. Carter was officially neutralized, trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, unable to buy a flight home or even pay for his next meal. The Golden Child's empire had cracked, leaving him exposed and vulnerable, but a parasite rarely starves quietly. If Carter could not access my credit, he would inevitably call his original hosts. Patricia and David would receive his panicked, desperate pleas for a rescue mission. My parents were backed into a corner. They had no credit left. Their son was stranded. Their forged documents were locked in my filing cabinet. Desperation breeds foolish decisions, and I knew they would try to stop the mounting invoice by taking the only collateral they believed they still controlled. They were going to try and reclaim the children, setting the stage for a hostile confrontation right on my doorstep. I just had to make sure my security cameras were recording when they arrived. The weekend arrived with a heavy blanket of pristine white snow covering the Vermont countryside. My farmhouse stood quiet against the winter landscape, a sanctuary shielded from the chaos of my family's collapsing empire. It had been 72 hours since I initiated the federal freeze on the stolen credit card. 3 days since Carter discovered he was stranded in Indonesia without a functioning line of credit. The silence from my parents was a ticking clock. I knew they were panicking. Their golden child was trapped, their financial crimes were documented, and the itemized invoice I sent them continued to accrue daily interest. Desperation is a predictable metric. When people who rely on manipulation lose their leverage, they resort to physical intimidation. I was in the kitchen, preparing a batch of oatmeal with fresh blueberries for the twins. Mason sat at the island counter, carefully drawing a picture of a blue tractor. Harper was beside him, swinging her legs, a soft hum escaping her lips. The tension that had gripped them upon their arrival a month ago was slowly dissolving. They were learning the rhythm of a safe household where meals appeared on schedule and dropped crayons did not result in a screaming match. Then my cell phone chimed with a distinct dual-tone alert. I wiped my hands on a linen towel and picked up the device. The application for my exterior security system filled the screen. The high-definition camera mounted above my front porch had detected motion at the base of the driveway. A silver Lexus was tearing up the gravel path, its tires spinning and sliding on the packed snow. The vehicle jerked to a halt mere inches from my wooden steps. I did not panic. I simply locked the screen of my phone and walked calmly to the front foyer. I stopped a few feet away from the heavy oak door. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see two distorted silhouettes marching up the steps. I pulled an electronic tablet from the console table and accessed the live camera feed. The screen displayed my parents in stunning 4K resolution. Patricia wore a tailored wool trench coat, her hair disheveled from the wind. Her face was flushed, drawn tight, with an indignation born from profound financial terror. David followed a step behind her. He carried a cheap nylon duffel bag slung over his shoulder. They had not driven 3 hours through a winter storm to apologize. They came to extract their collateral. They intended to pack my niece and nephew into that flimsy bag and remove the source of the mounting childcare invoices. Patricia reached the landing and hammered her fist against the doorframe. The hollow, rhythmic pounding echoed through the quiet hallway. "Open this door, Catherine!" she shouted. Her voice was muffled through the thick wood, but the shrill pitch of her entitlement pierced the barrier. "We are here to pick up the children!" Behind me, the scratching of Mason's crayon abruptly stopped. I turned my head. Both children had frozen. The soft hum died in Harper's throat. Their wide eyes darted toward the entryway. They recognized the demanding cadence of their grandmother's voice. Without a word, Mason slid off his wooden stool. He grabbed his sister's hand, pulling her across the floor. They scurried behind me, pressing their small bodies against the back of my legs. Harper gripped the fabric of my denim jeans, her knuckles turning white. Mason buried his face against my thigh. They were trembling, a deep instinctual fear radiating from their small frames. They were terrified of the people who were supposed to protect them. I reached down, resting one hand firmly on Mason's shoulder and the other on Harper's back. I stood my ground, transforming myself into an unyielding shield. I pressed the intercom button on the wall-mounted tablet. My voice projected clearly through the exterior speaker above the porch. "You are trespassing on private property," I stated. The tone I used was identical to the one I reserved for hostile corporate audits. Cold, sterile, and unbending. "Step away from the glass!" Patricia flinched as my voice dropped from above. She looked up at the black dome of the camera, her eyes narrowing with feral desperation. "Stop hiding behind a speaker!" she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the lens. "Bring them out here, right now! We found a woman in our neighborhood who runs an unlicensed daycare out of her basement. She only charges $10 a day. We are taking them there until Carter figures out his flight situation. We are not paying your absurd invoice for a luxury nanny." She confessed her entire strategy into a microphone. To save her own bank account, she was willing to rip 2 traumatized children from a stable home and dump them in an unverified basement. "The twins remain here," I replied through the intercom. "They are enrolled in the local elementary school. They are currently eating breakfast in a warm kitchen. You have 0 legal authority to remove them." David pushed past my mother, his face contorted with rage. He glared into the camera lens. "You have no legal rights either," he yelled. "We are their grandparents. We are taking custody today. Open the door before I force it open." I stared at the digital rendering of my father on the screen. He believed physical posturing could override the law. "If you attempt to damage my property, you will spend the weekend in a holding cell," I promised, softly. "Furthermore, you do not possess custody. You possess a fraudulent school residency affidavit bearing a forged signature which I have already documented with the district administration. You have no power here." The realization that their mail theft had been discovered sent a visible shockwave through David. He took a half-step backward, his bravado faltering. But Patricia was too deeply cornered to retreat. The identity theft investigation was hanging over her head, and her son was begging for a rescue she could not afford. She slammed both of her palms against the frosted glass. "You listen to me," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the intense strain. "You are going to call your bank and drop that ridiculous fraud charge today. You will unfreeze that credit card so your brother can pay his hotel bill. If you refuse, I will call Child Protective Services. I will tell them you kidnapped these kids. Better yet, I will surrender them as wards of the state. I will let them rot in the foster system before I let you bankrupt this family. Do you understand me?" The threat hovered in the frigid air. The sheer depravity of her words was almost difficult to process. She was willing to throw her own grandchildren into the foster care system, exposing them to unimaginable trauma solely to coerce a victim of identity theft into dropping a federal investigation. I glanced at the top corner of the tablet screen. A small red circle was blinking steadily. The 4K camera was capturing every single syllable in crystal clear audio. The threat of surrendering the children to the state was now a permanent digital record. She had handed me the ultimate weapon to sever their rights permanently. I released the intercom button. I did not waste breath arguing with a desperate criminal. I stepped away from the door, guiding the trembling twins toward the living room. "Stay right here on the rug," I whispered gently, offering them a reassuring smile. "I am going to give them a piece of paper, and then they are going to leave." I walked to the mahogany console table. Inside the top drawer rested a stack of formal documents I had prepared with my civil litigation attorney, Gideon, earlier that week. I retrieved a thick envelope printed on premium, watermarked parchment. Returning to the foyer, I unlatched the heavy brass mail slot near the bottom of the doorframe. I pushed the envelope through the narrow opening. The thick paper scraped against the metal, dropping onto the frosted welcome mat right at Patricia's boots. I engaged the intercom one final time. Read the document I instructed. Patricia scowled, bending down to snatch the envelope from the frozen mat. She tore the seal, her hands shaking from the cold and the adrenaline. David leaned over her shoulder as she unfolded the heavy paper. It was a formal legal demand and a notice of trespass. The document outlined the precise financial debt they owed, cited the specific penal codes for mail fraud and identity theft, and explicitly banned them from stepping foot within 500 feet of my property. "You have 60 seconds to return to your vehicle and drive away," I stated through the speaker, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "If your tires are still on my gravel when the clock expires, I am transmitting this live video feed and the audio recording of your extortion attempt directly to the local sheriff dispatcher. They will arrive in under 10 minutes. Patricia stared at the legal letter. Her lips parted, drawing in a ragged breath. The fiery indignation drained from her features, replaced by a sickly, hollow realization. She looked up at the blinking red light of the camera. The truth finally pierced her delusion. I was no longer the obedient daughter she could bully. I was an adversary, holding irrefutable evidence. David grasped her elbow, pulling her firmly toward the steps. "Let us go, Patricia," he muttered, his posture deflating. "We cannot do this right now." They turned their backs to the door and walked down the wooden stairs. The arrogant entitlement they had carried up the driveway was entirely erased, replaced by the crushing weight of public defeat. They climbed into their luxury vehicle. The engine roared and the tires spun in reverse, carrying them away from my sanctuary. I locked the brass mail slot and secured the deadbolt. The battle on my porch was over, but the war was destined to escalate. Humiliated people do not simply surrender. They seek validation. My parents would inevitably try to fight back, using the legal system, believing they could hire a cheap local lawyer to send empty civil threats. They had no idea that my attorney Gideon was already preparing a counterstrike, so lethal it would drag their financial crimes out of the shadows and into the hands of a federal inspector. The winter storm that chased my parents down the driveway eventually broke, leaving behind a brittle, freezing Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing quarterly tax reconciliations, while Emily taught Mason and Harper how to cut paper snowflakes in the living room. The soft snip of safety scissors and the quiet hum of the refrigerator provided a peaceful backdrop to my grueling audit schedule. Then the chime of the doorbell pulled my attention away from the spreadsheets. It was the postal carrier standing on the frosted porch, holding a certified envelope requiring a direct signature. I signed the electronic pad and carried the thick parchment back to my desk. The return address bore the letterhead of a generic strip mall law practice located 2 towns over from my parents' suburban neighborhood. The firm name was printed in a cheap, outdated font, the ink slightly blurred at the edges. The sender was an attorney named Higgins. I sliced the envelope open with a steel letter opener. The document inside was a formal cease and desist order. It was a masterpiece of legal posturing, filled with bloated vocabulary and hollow ultimatums. Higgins accused me of domestic extortion regarding the childcare invoices I had sent to my brother and parents. He claimed I was holding my niece and nephew against the will of their lawful grandparents. The final paragraph demanded I void the financial debt immediately, unfreeze the travel credit card, and surrender the children within 48 hours. If I failed to comply, he threatened to file an emergency injunction in family court to have the twins forcibly removed by law enforcement. My parents had followed the predictable playbook of cornered narcissists. They believed hiring the cheapest legal counsel they could find would intimidate me into submission. They assumed a piece of paper with a legal seal would send me scrambling to apologize. They brought a dull knife to a gunfight. I did not panic. I simply picked up my phone and dialed a downtown Burlington area code. My attorney Gideon did not operate out of a strip mall. He occupied a corner office on the top floor of a prestigious corporate firm. He was a veteran civil litigator who specialized in dismantling hostile corporate takeovers and navigating high-stakes financial disputes. He wore tailored wool suits, spoke in measured, quiet tones, and possessed a mind that viewed the law as a chessboard. I retained him years ago to handle complex liability contracts for my accounting practice. He was ruthless, precise, and he abhorred amateur tactics. I drove to his office that afternoon, leaving the twins in Emily's capable hands. The mahogany-paneled conference room overlooked the frozen expanse of Lake Champlain. I slid Higgins' demand letter across the polished table. Gideon picked up the document, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He read the text in silence. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. The kind of smile a predator makes when the prey walks willingly into a trap. "This is an embarrassment to the Bar Association," Gideon murmured, tossing the letter back onto the table. "This attorney is attempting to use civil litigation threats to shield his clients from a federal investigation. He has no idea what he just walked into." I opened my leather briefcase and withdrew the heavy black binder containing the Carter accountability files. I placed it in front of Gideon. "I am not interested in trading civil warning letters," I stated, my voice echoing the cold glass of the office windows. "My parents committed identity theft to fund a tropical vacation. They stole utility bills from my physical mailbox to forge state residency documents for public school enrollment. I want to escalate this beyond the family court jurisdiction. I want them cornered." Gideon opened the binder, his eyes scanning the pristine spreadsheets, the recorded audio transcripts, the IP address traces from the credit card application, and the forged school affidavits. As a legal professional, he recognized the sheer, undeniable weight of a flawless forensic paper trail. "We are bypassing the local courts entirely," Gideon decided, tapping his silver pen against the documents. "Extortion is a severe accusation, but it requires the absence of a legitimate debt. You have itemized receipts, you have audio proof of your mother abandoning the minors and demanding unpaid labor. But more importantly, we have the jurisdiction to trigger a federal response." Gideon drafted the countermaneuver while I sat across from him. He did not pen a defensive reply to the cease and desist. Instead, he formulated a devastating offensive strike. He compiled the evidence of the stolen electric bill and the forged signature on the school residency form. He attached the digital footprint of the credit card application originating from my parents' home IP address. He addressed the package not to the local police department, but directly to the United States Postal Inspection Service, citing felony mail theft. He created a secondary package routing the identity theft evidence straight to the Regional Cybercrime Division of the federal authorities. Only after securing the federal tracking numbers did Gideon address the blustering strip mall lawyer. He drafted a single-page response to Higgins. It was devoid of emotional language. It simply stated that the extortion claims were baseless, the debt was valid, and that the firm was hereby formally notifying him that his clients were currently the subjects of active federal investigations for wire fraud and mail theft. Gideon attached the certified tracking receipts proving the files had already been surrendered to the federal government. We sent the response via expedited courier. The trap was set and the bait was delivered. The fallout was swift and spectacular. 2 days later, my phone buzzed while I was cooking dinner. It was Gideon. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear, as I stirred a pot of simmering soup. "Higgins just called me, Gideon," announced a rare chuckle vibrating through the line. He was practically hyperventilating. I turned the stove burner down, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Tell me everything." According to Gideon, the cheap attorney had opened our courier package expecting a standard negotiation. When he read the words United States Postal Inspection Service and saw the irrefutable proof of federal wire fraud, the color drained from his legal practice. In the legal profession, defending a messy family custody dispute is standard practice. Aiding and abetting clients who are actively lying about committing federal felonies is a fast track to disbarment. Higgins realized my parents had lied to him. They had omitted the stolen mail, the forged signatures, and the $32,000 stolen credit line. They presented themselves as innocent grandparents being bullied by a greedy daughter. "He dropped them immediately," Gideon reported. "He formally withdrew his representation. He drafted a termination of counsel notice and sent it to your parents via registered mail. He wanted me to know he has zero involvement with their financial crimes. He washed his hands of the entire family." I closed my eyes, absorbing the profound satisfaction of the victory. My parents had tried to outgun me with a hollow threat, and I had responded with a nuclear deterrent. Patricia and David were now legally naked. They had no legal representation. They had no financial leverage. They were drowning in a forensic paper trail that was currently sitting on a federal investigator's desk. The shield they thought their age and parental status provided had evaporated, leaving them exposed to the brutal consequences of their own arrogance. "Thank you, Gideon," I said softly. "We are just getting started, Catherine," he replied. "Keep tracking the debt. The pressure will force them to make another mistake." I ended the call and set the phone down. The soup simmered gently on the stove. The farmhouse was peaceful, filled with the quiet sounds of Harper singing a nursery rhyme to her stuffed bear in the living room. My parents were cornered, but a lingering question still bothered my analytical mind. The stolen credit card explained how they paid for Carter's initial flights and the luxury villa, but it did not explain how they maintained their affluent suburban lifestyle while secretly sinking into poverty. A fixed pension could not cover their property taxes, their luxury vehicles, and their designer wardrobes. They were hiding a substantial influx of cash, a hidden reservoir of funds that they desperately wanted to protect from my scrutiny. If they had no credit and no savings, where was the money originating? I left the kitchen and walked into my home office. I booted up my dual monitors. If I wanted to find out how deep their financial grave truly went, I needed to bypass their personal banking and look at the only tangible asset they had left. I pulled up the state property registry database and typed in the address of my childhood home. I was about to unearth a secret so catastrophic it would transform my simple childcare invoice into the weapon that would trigger their total bankruptcy. The glow of my dual monitors illuminated the dark confines of my home office, casting long shadows against the walls. The house was quiet save for the low, steady hum of the heating vent overhead. I stared at the blinking cursor on the search bar of the State Property Registry database. For years, I had accepted the narrative my parents fed me. I believed they were simply foolish enablers blinded by a toxic devotion to their eldest son, draining their modest pension to keep him afloat. But identity theft is a crime of sheer desperation. People who own paid-off suburban homes do not risk federal prison for airline tickets unless their foundation is already crumbling. I typed the address of my childhood home into the public records query. My parents resided in a pristine 4-bedroom colonial in an upscale neighborhood just south of the Vermont border. They had purchased it 30 years ago. By all traditional financial metrics, the mortgage should have been satisfied, leaving them with hundreds of thousands of dollars in pure equity. The digital archives loaded, populating the screen with a chronological list of property deeds, tax assessments, and recorded liens. I scanned the dates, my eyes tracing the timeline backward. There was the original deed of trust. There were the routine municipal tax payments always filed on time. But sitting right at the top of the registry, dated the first week of October, was a fresh, unexpected filing. It was a deed of trust securing a new promissory note against the property. My parents had taken out a secondary loan. I clicked the hyperlinked document to view the scanned public record. I expected to see a standard home equity line of credit issued by their local credit union. Instead, the lender listed on the deed was a private, hard money lending firm based out of a Delaware shell company. The forensic accountant inside me went on high alert. Traditional banks offer low interest rates, but they require stringent proof of income, verified tax returns, and debt-to-income ratios. Hard money lenders do not care about your pension. They bypass federal underwriting standards, charging predatory double-digit interest rates and enforcing brutal repayment terms. They cater exclusively to desperate people who need liquid cash overnight and possess the real estate collateral to secure it. The principal amount recorded on the loan was $250,000. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the breath stalling in my chest. My parents had leveraged the entire remaining equity of their home, signing a predatory contract that could strip them of their residence if they missed a single payment. They secured $250,000 in liquid cash just 4 weeks before they dumped the twins on my porch and stole my identity. The timeline did not make sense. If they acquired $250,000 in October, why did they need to forge a credit card application in my name for a $32,000 travel expense in November? Where did $250,000 go in less than 30 days? I pulled a fresh legal pad from my drawer and grabbed a pen. I wrote down the date of the hard money loan. Then I wrote down Carter's name. My brother had spent the last 2 years marketing himself as a cryptocurrency visionary. He peddled an endless stream of digital tokens to his online followers, promising guaranteed returns and a decentralized lifestyle. He drove leased luxury vehicles and posted videos from rented yachts, projecting the illusion of infinite wealth. I opened a new browser tab. I navigated away from the local property registry and logged into the federal court docket system. I also opened the Edgar database, the digital repository for the Securities and Exchange Commission. If $250,000 vanished overnight, it usually meant someone was paying legal retainers, attempting to settle out of court, or desperately trying to refund angry investors before the authorities intervened. I searched Carter's legal name alongside the primary holding company he used for his digital assets. The search results populated instantly. The screen filled with a dozen corresponding hits. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Carter was not undergoing a spiritual awakening. He was the subject of an active, sweeping civil enforcement action. I clicked on the primary federal filing. The Securities and Exchange Commission had initiated a formal investigation into his holding company in late September. The legal complaint detailed a classic, unvarnished fraud scheme. Carter had launched a digital token, artificially inflated the price through deceptive marketing, and then abruptly siphoned the liquidity pool into his own private offshore accounts. He had stolen the life savings of vulnerable retail investors to fund his designer wardrobe and luxury car leases. The federal authorities had frozen his domestic bank accounts. They had issued a mountain of subpoenas. He was facing staggering financial penalties and the very real threat of criminal referrals. The puzzle pieces snapped together, forming a picture so reckless it bordered on sheer insanity. Carter did not fly to Indonesia to find his soul. He fled the country because Indonesia possesses complex, notoriously difficult extradition treaties for white-collar financial crimes. He was running from a federal indictment. When his own accounts were seized by the government, he ran to his enablers. Patricia and David, terrified that their golden child was heading to a federal penitentiary, mortgaged their entire existence to save him. They signed a predatory loan, extracting $250,000 from their home. They likely used that cash to hire elite defense attorneys, pay off the most aggressive creditors, or perhaps funnel the remaining liquid assets into untraceable digital wallets for his escape. They burned through their entire net worth in a single month to construct a firewall around my brother. When the cash ran out, and Carter still needed plane tickets and resort accommodations to live as a fugitive in Bali, they had no credit left. They had no equity left. They turned to the only untouched asset they could reach: my Social Security number. I stared at the federal docket, a profound, chilling clarity washing over me. My parents were not just arrogant enablers, they were severely over-leveraged, balancing on the edge of a sheer fiscal cliff. Their debt-to-income ratio was fatal. The predatory lender held the deed to their home. Their son was a fugitive whose stolen funds were frozen by international banking authorities. They were one minor financial shock away from total, irreversible bankruptcy. I minimized the internet browser and opened my encrypted hard drive. I navigated to the Carter Accountability folder and clicked on the master billing spreadsheet. I looked at the line items I had recorded over the past 90 days. The heavy winter coats, the premium organic groceries, Emily's hourly wages for providing childcare while I worked, the emergency pediatric dental surgery to fix Harper's rotting teeth, the hazard fee for the unannounced driveway ambush. I needed to update the ledger. I added the legal retainer I had paid to Gideon to draft the federal fraud reports. I added the prorated utilities and the increased household insurance premiums for housing two dependents. I selected the column and applied the daily compounding corporate interest rate, adjusting the formula to reflect the exact current date. The software calculated the sum in a fraction of a second. The final cell illuminated with the updated total: $42,600. I rested my hands on the desk, feeling the smooth wood grain beneath my fingertips. A few hours ago, this invoice was simply a tool for reimbursement. It was a boundary line drawn in the sand. But armed with the knowledge of their secret second mortgage, the nature of this document had fundamentally changed. This invoice was no longer just a bill. It was a structural wrecking ball. If my parents failed to pay this debt, Gideon could file a civil judgment against them. In the state where they resided, a validated legal judgment allowed the creditor to place a formal service lien directly onto their real estate property. Placing a new hostile lien onto a house already burdened by a predatory hard money loan would trigger an automatic breach of covenant with their private lender. The shadow bank would instantly call the entire $250,000 loan due in full. My invoice would force a foreclosure. It would strip them of their home, their sanctuary, and their false suburban prestige. They had built a precarious house of cards, sacrificing my niece and nephew, stealing my identity, and aiding a fugitive, all to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. I was holding the exact financial breeze required to topple the entire structure. I saved the spreadsheet and exported it as a secure read-only document. I emailed the updated file directly to Gideon, attaching a brief note detailing the predatory mortgage and the SEC investigation I had just uncovered. I knew my attorney would see the exact same lethal legal strategy I did. The end game was approaching faster than I anticipated. Carter was trapped in Bali with a declined credit card. The Indonesian immigration authorities do not tolerate destitute tourists overstaying their visas, especially individuals flagged by international banking networks for fraud. Without access to funds, his luxury resort would evict him. He would be forced to seek deportation or beg a consulate for a repatriation flight. The golden child was coming back to American soil, broke, disgraced, and running out of places to hide. When he landed, he and my parents would have no choice but to confront the only solvent relative they had left. They would march into Gideon's office, expecting to bully me into dropping the charges and surrendering the children. They were walking into a financial slaughterhouse, and I was holding the blade. The Indonesian immigration authorities operate with a swift, unforgiving efficiency when dealing with penniless tourists flagged by international financial databases. Carter did not experience a spiritual awakening in Bali. He experienced a forced deportation. When the stolen travel card declined, the luxury resort locked him out of his villa. He and Lauren spent 2 days sleeping in a humid airport terminal, their passports flagged, their funds frozen by the Securities and Exchange Commission, waiting for the American consulate to arrange a repatriation flight. They landed at a regional airport in New England on a Tuesday morning, wearing wrinkled tropical linen in the middle of a brutal northeast winter. They possessed zero currency, zero leverage, and zero places to hide. They had no choice but to call Patricia and David for a rescue. 2 hours later, my cell phone illuminated on my desk. It was Gideon. He informed me that my parents had just scheduled an emergency meeting at his law office for that afternoon. They claimed they were coming to collect the children and resolve the dispute. I printed the final spreadsheet, gathered my evidence files, and drove downtown. The conference room in Gideon's office building offered a sweeping, panoramic view of the frozen lake. The sky was an unforgiving shade of slate gray. The room smelled of polished mahogany and expensive leather. I sat beside Gideon at the long table, the heavy black binder resting in front of me. We waited in silence. At exactly 3 o'clock, the heavy glass doors opened. My family walked into the room, bringing the bitter cold in with them. Patricia and David entered first, their faces drawn tight, projecting a brittle facade of authority. Behind them dragged Carter and his partner, Lauren. I observed my brother for the first time in months. The curated, wealthy cryptocurrency nomad aesthetic had evaporated. His skin was sunburned and peeling. Dark circles bruised the fragile skin beneath his eyes. He smelled faintly of stale airplane cabin air and unwashed anxiety. Lauren trailed behind him, shivering in a thin designer tracksuit, looking thoroughly exhausted by the reality of dating a fugitive. She was a woman who built her entire personality around affluent aesthetics, and now she was standing in a legal office, relying on her boyfriend's parents for a ride. They took their seats across from us. Nobody offered a greeting. Carter leaned back in his leather chair, stretching his long legs out beneath the table. He crossed his arms, attempting to summon the arrogant swagger that had defined his entire existence. "Let us stop playing these cute little games," Catherine Carter began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mom said you are holding the twins hostage over some ridiculous babysitting bill. You can drop the act. I am here. We are taking Mason and Harper back today." I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. I did not look at Carter. I looked at Patricia. She was staring at the black binder, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching beneath her skin. "You abandoned 2 minors on my porch with zero financial support, no winter clothing, and untreated medical emergencies," I stated, my tone devoid of warmth. "I provided premium childcare, emergency pediatric dental surgery, and daily necessities. I also endured a hostile trespass attempt and documented federal identity theft." Carter let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He shook his head, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "You think you are so smart with your spreadsheets," he sneered, leaning forward. "You think you can extort us. Here is a reality check for you. The federal government just froze all my domestic holding accounts. The Securities and Exchange Commission tied up my corporate assets. I literally do not have a single dollar to my name. I am broke. You can wave your little invoices around all you want, but you cannot squeeze blood from a stone. I am judgment-proof." He smiled a wide, triumphant grin. He genuinely believed his own financial ruin was a shield. He thought his bankruptcy made him invincible to my demands. He expected me to sigh in defeat, hand over the children, and absorb the crushing debt just as I had done when I was 18 years old. I looked at his smug, sunburned face, and I felt a profound sense of pity for his ignorance. I pushed the heavy black leather binder across the polished mahogany wood. It slid across the smooth surface and hit the center of the table with a dull, resonant thud. "I am not suing you, Carter," I replied quietly. His smile faltered, confusion rippling across his forehead. "You possess 0 assets." I continued, my voice steady and surgical. "You are a fugitive facing a federal indictment. Taking you to civil court would be a profound waste of my billable hours. I do not want your money, because you do not have any." I shifted my gaze across the table, locking eyes with my father. "I am suing David and Patricia," I announced. The silence that fell over the room was immediate and suffocating. David stiffened, pulling his hands off the table. Patricia stopped breathing. "Under the legal doctrine of joint and several liability," I explained, watching the color drain from my mother's face. "The individuals who facilitated the fraud are equally responsible for the damages. Carter did not forge my signature on a state residency affidavit. Carter did not steal a utility bill from my mailbox. Carter did not bypass a federal security check to open a premium travel credit card using my social security number. You did." Gideon stepped, in his voice calm and authoritative. "Because you committed identity theft to fund the abandonment of those children, you are liable co-defendants. Your previous attorney reviewed the evidence and terminated his representation because he knew you were guilty of federal wire fraud." Patricia reached a trembling hand toward the heavy binder. She flipped it open. The top sheet of paper was the itemized legal invoice. Her eyes scanned the columns. The winter gear, the pediatric dental surgery, the hazard fees, the corporate interest compounding daily. Her perfectly manicured fingers started to shake. The false high society smile she wore like armor melted right off her face. Her knees buckled under the weight of the number printed at the bottom of the page. She collapsed backward into the rigid leather guest chair. She stared at the invoice, her mouth opening and closing, unable to pull enough air into her lungs to form a word. $42,600. David read aloud, his voice cracking into a hoarse whisper. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, frantic pleading. "Catherine, we do not have this kind of cash. You know, we live on a fixed pension. You are our daughter. You cannot do this to us." "I am your forensic accountant," I corrected him, "and I know exactly what you have." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my own folder and laid it flat on the desk. It was a printed copy of the Public Property Registry. "I know about the private hard money lender in Delaware," I stated, watching the final shred of hope die in my father's eyes. "I know you signed a predatory second mortgage in October. I know you leveraged the entire remaining equity of your home, securing $250,000 to pay for Carter's defense attorneys when the government seized his crypto wallets. You are leveraged to the breaking point. You are one financial breeze away from total insolvency." Lauren gasped, turning to Carter with a look of pure betrayal. "You told me they were rich," she hissed, her superficial loyalty evaporating the moment the illusion of wealth shattered. Carter ignored her, staring at the property record on the table. Gideon folded his hands, delivering the lethal blow. "Because this debt stems from uncompensated services and documented fraud, we bypassed the standard civil delays. We filed an emergency motion based on the evidence of your impending insolvency. As of 9 o'clock this morning, a formal service lien has been recorded against the deed of your suburban home." Patricia let out a ragged, choking sob. "A lien against a property already burdened by a predatory shadow loan is a fatal event. The terms of hard money contracts are universally unforgiving. If this invoice is not satisfied in full via a certified cashier check within 30 days, Gideon concluded, his tone unyielding. "We will execute the lien. We will force the sale of your home at public auction to recover the debt. The primary lender will call their loan due immediately due to a breach of covenant. You will lose your house, your equity, and your sanctuary." My parents had spent their entire lives burning my resources to keep their golden child warm. They assumed I would always act as the silent safety net. Now they were staring down the barrel of their own homelessness, trapped by the very legal system they thought they could manipulate. The 30-day countdown had officially begun, and the toxic foundation of our family was about to collapse under the crushing weight of its own debt. The silence in the mahogany conference room stretched until it felt fragile, ready to shatter under the slightest pressure. Patricia remained slumped in the leather guest chair, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw oxygen into her lungs. The pristine, curated image she had projected for decades was disintegrating before my eyes. She stared at the invoice, her pupils dilated with a terror that went beyond mere embarrassment. She was looking at the end of her carefully maintained suburban existence. David could not process the defeat. For a man who had spent his life bullying his way out of consequences, the realization that he was trapped ignited a fierce, uncontrolled fury. He sprang up from his seat. The heavy wooden chair scraped harshly against the polished floorboards, tipping backward and crashing to the ground. "You vindictive little wretch!" David roared, his face flushing a deep, dangerous crimson. He planted both hands on the edge of the conference table, leaning his upper body toward me. "You think you can steal our home? I will drag you through every court in this state. I will make sure you never practice accounting again." I did not flinch. I did not lean back. I held his gaze, watching the desperation fuel his wrath. Before David could launch another threat, Gideon intervened. My attorney did not raise his voice. He merely tapped his silver pen against the rim of his ceramic coffee mug. The sharp, clear chime cut through my father's shouting. "I highly recommend you lower your voice, David Gideon," suggested, his tone smooth and dangerously polite. He gestured with the pen toward the upper corner of the room. "This office is equipped with high-definition security cameras for the protection of our staff. They capture both video and audio. If you continue to lean across this table and threaten my client, I will add verbal assault and physical intimidation to the dossier we are handing over to the Federal Postal Inspector." David froze. He traced Gideon's gesture and spotted the small blinking light mounted near the ceiling tiles. The fiery rage drained from his face, replaced by the sickening realization that he possessed zero leverage. He slowly stood up straight, his chest rising and falling in ragged intervals. Patricia suddenly gasped, leaning forward and grasping Carter by the sleeve of his wrinkled linen shirt. Her fingers dug into the fabric. "Carter, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "You have to do something. You told us you had contingency plans. You told us you moved the digital assets into cold storage before the government arrived. Call your offshore contacts. Wire the funds to Catherine so we can clear this lien. If the private lender finds out, we will be out on the street by Christmas." David turned his attention to his son, nodding frantically. "Your mother is right. We took out that loan to save you from federal prison, Carter. We put our entire lives on the line to buy you time. You owe us. Transfer the capital and fix this mess." I sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. This was the moment I had anticipated since I uncovered the predatory mortgage. I was about to watch the toxic family dynamic eat itself alive in real time. Carter looked down at his mother's hand gripping his arm. A look of profound annoyance washed over his sunburned features. He did not offer a reassuring smile. He did not reach out to comfort the woman who had sacrificed her financial security to fund his escape. He forcefully yanked his arm away, breaking her grip. "Are you deaf?" Carter snapped, glaring at his parents with unabashed contempt. "I just told you I am broke. The authorities flagged every single wallet address I own. If I try to move a single digital token, the feds will track the transaction and arrest me. I am not risking a federal indictment to pay off a babysitting invoice." Patricia stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But we are going to lose the house," she whimpered, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes, ruining her expensive mascara. "We did this for you. I never asked you to sign a predatory loan," Carter shot back, shifting the blame with the effortless grace of a lifelong narcissist. "You chose to sign that paperwork. You chose to mortgage your house. That was your financial decision. Do not try to pin your bad real estate choices on me. I have my own problems to worry about." The air in the room grew heavy with the toxic fallout. David stumbled backward, leaning against the glass wall for support. He looked at his son, the golden child he had worshipped and funded for 3 decades, and finally saw the monster he had created. Carter was willing to watch his parents become homeless rather than face a minor inconvenience or risk his own skin. The unconditional devotion flowed only one way, and the well had officially run dry. Lauren, sitting silently at the end of the table, stood up. She pulled her designer jacket tighter around her shivering shoulders. She looked at Carter with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are pathetic," Lauren sneered, grabbing her purse. "I am going to the airport. Do not ever call me again." She walked out of the conference room, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind her. Carter did not even turn his head to watch her leave. His empire had crumbled, his relationship was over, and his parents were ruined. Yet he still sat there, pouting over his own misfortune, entirely devoid of empathy. David turned his desperate, hollow gaze back to me. His pride was shattered, lying in pieces on the mahogany table. He placed his hands together, intertwining his fingers in a gesture that closely resembled prayer. "Catherine, please," David pleaded, his voice stripped of all authority. "We made mistakes. We were terrified for your brother. We were not thinking clearly. We can negotiate this. I can pull together $5,000 by Friday. We can set up a monthly payment plan for the rest. Just lift the lien so the shadow bank does not foreclose on us. You are our daughter. Have some mercy." I looked at the man who had ordered me to empty my teenage savings account to bail out a drunk driver. I looked at the woman who had threatened to send Child Protective Services to my farmhouse. "I do not negotiate with people who steal my identity," I replied, my voice steady and freezing. "I do not offer payment plans to people who forge my signature on federal documents." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, ensuring they felt the full weight of their actions. "Let me remind you of the choices you made," I continued, enunciating every word. "You drove to my home in the middle of November. You left 2 shivering, terrified children on a freezing porch, wearing paper-thin jackets. You refused to answer my calls. You stole my utility bill to commit residency fraud. When I hired a professional to care for the children you abandoned, you tried to extort me by threatening a government raid. You treated my life, my career, and my home as a dumpster for your consequences." Patricia buried her face in her hands, weeping loudly into the quiet room. Her sobs were wet and jagged, filled with the agony of a woman realizing her actions finally carried a price tag. "There is no mercy," I stated, finalizing the verdict. "There is only the invoice. You have exactly 30 days from this morning to present a certified cashier check for $42,600. If the funds are not in Gideon's escrow account by the 30th day, the foreclosure process initiates. I will force the sale of your property, and I will take my reimbursement from the auction proceeds." David stared at me, his face pale and sunken. He understood that no amount of begging, no amount of guilt-tripping, and no amount of parental authority would save him. The silent safety net had turned into a steel trap. "We are done here," Gideon announced, standing up and closing the black leather binder. "You know the deadline. I suggest you spend your time finding a buyer for your assets rather than sitting in my office." My parents moved slowly, their bodies heavy with defeat. David helped Patricia to her feet. They did not look at me. They did not look at Carter. They shuffled out of the conference room like ghosts, leaving the golden child sitting alone at the table. Carter stood up, shoving his hands into his pockets. He glared at me, his jaw working furiously. "You really destroyed this family over a few dollars," he muttered, shaking his head. "I did not destroy anything," I replied softly. "I just stopped funding the illusion." He turned and walked out the door, sealing behind him. I sat back in my chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. The financial retaliation was secure. The predators were defanged. But as the adrenaline faded, a new critical reality settled over the room. My parents were facing imminent homelessness. Carter was destitute and facing a federal indictment. Lauren was gone. My niece and nephew were currently sitting in my farmhouse, coloring pictures and waiting for me to come home. They were legally tied to a man who could not even afford a cup of coffee, let alone provide a stable environment. The financial war was won, but the battle for the custody of those innocent children was just beginning. Carter still retained his parental rights, and a cornered, desperate man is always looking for new leverage. I knew I had to secure Mason and Harper permanently before Carter realized they were the last valuable chips he had left to play. The drive back to my farmhouse that evening felt different. The relentless tension that had gripped my shoulders for a month began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, profound clarity. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes, coating the winding rural roads in a fresh layer of pristine white. My headlights sliced through the darkness, guiding me toward the warm, yellow glow of my front porch. I parked the car and walked up the wooden steps. When I pushed the heavy oak door open, the scent of cinnamon and baked apples washed over me. Inside the living room, a fire crackled steadily in the hearth. Emily sat on the plush rug, reading a picture book aloud. Mason and Harper were tucked into a makeshift fort, constructed from sofa cushions and heavy wool blankets. They wore matching flannel pajamas. Harper giggled at a funny voice Emily used for one of the characters, while Mason watched with quiet, engaged fascination. I stood in the foyer shrugging off my winter coat, simply observing them. Over the past 4 weeks, these children had ceased to be a disruption to my structured existence. They had become the heart of it. I knew Harper preferred her toast cut into triangles, and that she hummed softly when she felt secure. I knew Mason required a 10-minute warning before any transition in our daily schedule, a trauma response to the unpredictable chaos of his former life. I had watched the fear drain from their eyes, replaced by the tentative, beautiful trust of children realizing they were finally safe. Looking at them bathed in the firelight, an undeniable truth settled into my bones. I could never let them leave. Carter was broken destitute and facing a federal indictment. My parents were staring down an imminent foreclosure, but desperate people are inherently dangerous. Carter still held the legal title of biological father. In the eyes of the family court system, he retained the authority to walk up to my door and demand his children back. He could use them as bargaining chips, threatening to pull them out of their stable environment just to extort me for living expenses. I needed to sever his rights permanently before he realized the twins were the only leverage he had left to play. I retreated to my home office and dialed my attorney. Gideon answered on the second ring. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I instructed him to draft a voluntary termination of parental rights agreement, ironclad and unassailable. I wanted every potential loophole sealed. I wanted Carter stripped of all legal authority, medical decision-making power, and visitation privileges. I wanted to become their sole, permanent guardian in the eyes of the law. 3 days later, my phone vibrated with an incoming text message. It was from an unknown number, but the arrogant, demanding syntax belonged unmistakably to my brother. He instructed me to meet him at a roadside diner positioned near the interstate highway, miles away from the affluent downtown areas he used to frequent. I arrived at the location just after 2 in the afternoon. The diner was a decaying relic, wrapped in faded aluminum siding, its neon sign flickering sporadically against the gray winter sky. The interior smelled of stale fryer grease and scorched coffee. I spotted Carter sitting in a cracked vinyl booth in the far corner. The physical deterioration of the golden child was striking. He wore the same white linen shirt from Gideon's office, but the collar was now stained with sweat and dirt. The sunburn on his face had peeled, leaving raw, patchy skin across his nose and cheeks. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted a heavy ceramic mug to his lips. He looked hollow, stripped of the unearned confidence that had shielded him from reality his entire life. I slid into the booth across from him, keeping my posture straight and guarded. I placed my leather briefcase on the sticky laminate table between us. "I do not have time for a long catch-up, Carter," I stated, keeping my voice clinical. "Why did you ask me here?" He set the mug down, avoiding my gaze. He stared out the grime-covered window at the passing highway traffic. "Lauren left me," he muttered, his voice lacking its usual theatrical volume. "She blocked my number. My own parents will not even answer my calls. They are too busy packing their house into cardboard boxes because of your little invoice. The federal investigators raided my holding company yesterday. They seized the remaining servers. I have $38 in my pocket. I am sleeping in a motel that charges by the hour." He recited his misfortunes, waiting for the familiar rush of sympathy. He expected me to offer a solution, a temporary loan or a warm bed. I remained silent, offering him nothing but a cold, steady stare. Carter sighed, drumming his fingers nervously against the table. "Look, I cannot deal with the kids right now, Catherine. I cannot drag 2 minors around while I am fighting a federal subpoena. They are a burden. They eat too much, they cry, and they ruin my focus." The sheer, sickening apathy in his tone made my stomach turn. He spoke about his own flesh and blood as if they were defective luggage he wanted to discard at the airport. "I only brought them on those vacations because the algorithm favored family content," he confessed, shrugging his shoulders. "The crypto nomad aesthetic plays better when you look like a devoted father. Sponsors love that stuff. But my accounts are gone. The brand is dead. I have no use for the aesthetic anymore." He leaned forward, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper, as if he were offering me a lucrative business deal. "You are good at this domestic stuff," he said. "You have the big empty house, you have the stable income. Just keep them. They like it out there in the woods anyway. You can raise them, and I will just stay out of your hair. We do not even need to involve the courts. Just keep feeding them, and we will call it even." The profound disgust I felt for the man sitting across from me threatened to crack my stoic facade. He believed he was doing me a favor. He wanted to walk away from his fundamental responsibilities without facing a single legal consequence, leaving the door open to return whenever it suited him. I unlatched the brass clasps of my leather briefcase. "We are going to involve the courts, Carter," I corrected him, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from the interior compartment. "I am not running an informal boarding house for your convenience. If I assume the financial and emotional responsibility of raising these children, I will do it on my terms." I slid the paperwork across the sticky table. "This is a voluntary termination of parental rights," I explained, tapping the top page with my index finger. "By signing this, you sever all legal ties to Mason and Harper. You forfeit the right to make medical decisions. You forfeit the right to dictate where they attend school. You forfeit any future claims to visitation. In the eyes of the law, you will become a ghost to them." Carter stared at the bold legal print. He did not look heartbroken. He did not look conflicted. He looked relieved. "If I sign this, I am off the hook?" he asked, his eyes darting back up to my face. "You are not going to come after me for child support later. You have zero income to garnish," I reminded him dryly. "I do not need your money. I need your absence." He reached across the table, grabbing the pen I had placed next to the documents. He did not read the terms. He did not pause to consider the monumental weight of the decision he was making. He did not ask how Harper's dental surgery went or if Mason was sleeping through the night. He flipped straight to the final page and pressed the tip of the pen against the signature line. The scratch of the ballpoint ink on the thick paper was the only sound in our corner of the diner. It was a small, definitive noise. With a few careless strokes of his wrist, he erased himself from their future. He traded the privilege of being a father for the pathetic freedom of walking away unburdened. He tossed the pen onto the table and pushed the documents back toward me. "Done," he said, exhaling a long breath. I gathered the paperwork, inspecting the signature to ensure it was legible. I slipped the stack back into my briefcase and snapped the clasps shut. I stood up, smoothing the front of my wool coat. "I will file these with a family court judge tomorrow morning," I informed him. "The transition will be permanent. Do not attempt to contact my household again." Carter did not reply. He was already looking down at his empty coffee mug, entirely consumed by his own misery. I walked out of the diner, pushing through the heavy glass doors into the freezing winter air. The cold wind bit at my cheeks, but I barely felt it. A profound, overwhelming sense of victory washed through my chest. The financial retaliation had neutralized my parents, but this document secured the ultimate prize. Mason and Harper were finally safe. They were legally anchored in Vermont, protected by an ironclad decree that shielded them from the toxic legacy of their bloodline. The generational cycle of manipulation and abandonment ended today. I climbed into my car, turning the heater on high, ready to drive back to the farmhouse. I had a family waiting for me, and for the first time in my life, I held the power to ensure nobody could ever tear it apart. The calendar advanced with the slow, deliberate pace of a dripping faucet. 29 days had passed since Gideon filed the formal service lien against my parents' suburban home. One single day remained before the foreclosure process initiated. For 4 weeks, the silence from their end of the state was profound. I knew they were scrambling. When a predatory shadow bank holds your primary mortgage, a secondary lien acts as a fatal breach of contract. The lender was hovering, waiting to seize the property and auction it off to the highest bidder. My parents had 24 hours left to produce $42,600 in liquid cash, or they would be sleeping in a roadside motel. How did they locate the funds? Through my network of financial investigators, I learned the exact price of their salvation. David possessed a prized collection of vintage automobiles. He kept them in a climate-controlled, detached garage behind their house. A restored 1967 Chevrolet Corvette and a pristine 1969 Ford Mustang. He spent his weekends polishing the chrome bumpers, treating those machines with a tenderness and devotion he never afforded his own grandchildren. The cars were his ultimate status symbols, his tangible proof of success. On day 28, out of sheer desperation, he sold them. Because he needed the funds transferred overnight, he could not wait for a private collector. He liquidated his prized possessions to a commercial dealership at a steep, punishing discount, securing just enough capital to satisfy my invoice and appease the shadow lender. He traded his mechanical pride to buy back his roof. The morning of day 29 arrived with a biting, relentless frost. I drove into downtown Burlington, pulling my wool coat tight against the chilling wind. Gideon was already waiting in his corner office. The mahogany conference table was bare, save for a few distinct manila folders and a silver pen. The expansive windows offered a view of the gray, turbulent waters of Lake Champlain. We sat in companionable silence, watching the clock tick toward the scheduled 10 o'clock appointment. At precisely 2 minutes past the hour, the heavy glass doors swung inward. Patricia and David stepped into the room. The physical toll of the past month was staggering. The stress of impending homelessness had carved deep, permanent lines into their faces. My father's shoulders slumped, his posture defeated and hollow. He refused to look at me, staring instead at the polished grain of the wooden table. My mother, however, radiated a brittle, toxic hatred. Her eyes were sunken, shadowed by sleepless nights, yet they burned with a focused, bitter resentment. She clutched a leather handbag against her chest as if it were a shield. They took their seats across from us. The air in the room grew thick, stifling, and heavy with unspoken venom. Patricia unclasped her handbag. Her fingers trembled slightly as she withdrew a crisp, rectangular piece of paper. It was a certified cashier check, drawn from a local bank branch, stamped with the official watermark. She did not hand it to Gideon. She placed her palm flat against the paper and slid it across the mahogany surface. It stopped directly in front of me. "Read the numbers." Patricia hissed, her voice a ragged, breathless whisper. "It is all there. Every single penny you demanded. You bankrupted your own father. You forced him to sell the only things that brought him joy. I hope you are proud of the destruction you caused." I looked down at the certified document. The printed text confirmed the exact total: $42,600. The debt was satisfied. The financial guillotine was halted. I did not touch the paper. I met my mother's gaze, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "We are releasing the lien today," Gideon stated calmly, sliding a release of claim form toward David. "Once you sign this acknowledgement, the public record will reflect the payment. Your primary lender will be notified that the breach of contract is resolved. Your home is secure." David picked up the silver pen, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the metal barrel. He signed the document in hurried, jagged strokes, desperate to finalize the transaction. He pushed the paper back to Gideon and stood up, ready to flee the room. Patricia remained seated. She leaned forward, her eyes locked onto mine, harboring 30 years of misplaced resentment. "You are dead to this family, Catherine," she spat, every syllable dripping with concentrated malice. "You are no daughter of mine. Do not ever call us. Do not ever show up at our house. If you die in a hospital bed, do not expect us to attend the funeral. You chose your spreadsheets over your own blood. You are empty." She delivered the words, expecting them to wound me. She wanted to inflict a deep, lingering emotional scar, a final punishment for stripping away her financial control. She anticipated tears, or perhaps a defensive argument. She wanted to see regret in my eyes. I felt nothing but a cool, refreshing wave of liberation. Her rejection was not a punishment. It was a signed permission slip to walk away forever. "I am comfortable with those terms," I replied, my voice steady and quiet. "But before you leave, there is one final administrative correction we need to make." I placed my index finger on the edge of the certified check and pushed it back across the table, returning it to Patricia. She recoiled, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her panic flaring instantly. "The amount is correct. The bank certified the funds. Take the money and release the lien." "The amount is correct," I agreed, opening the manila folder resting in front of me, "but the payee is wrong. I cannot deposit this." Gideon extracted a pristine legal document from the folder, placing it in the center of the table. It bore the seal of a registered financial institution. The heading across the top read, "The Mason and Harper College Trust." "I am not keeping your money," I explained, watching the confusion on my parents' faces curdle into a new, complex flavor of horror. "I do not need your money. I have a lucrative career. I own a restored farmhouse. I possess a flawless credit score. I never wanted a single dime for myself." I pointed to the trust document. "Carter signed away his parental rights last week," I revealed. The declaration hung in the air, a devastating blow they never anticipated. Their golden child had officially abandoned the next generation. I am now the sole legal guardian of your grandchildren, I continued. They are safe, they are thriving, and they will never endure the toxic dysfunction of this bloodline again. But raising children requires a secure financial foundation, one you attempted to steal from them when you funded Carter's tropical escape. Patricia stared at the trust paperwork, her lips parting in stunned silence. You are going to take that cashier check down to the bank lobby on the first floor of this building, I instructed, my tone shifting into an uncompromising command. You are going to void the current payee. You will request a new certified draft made payable directly to the Mason and Harper College Trust. You are going to fund the future of the children you discarded on my freezing porch. You are going to pay for their university tuition, their textbooks, and their housing. Every penny you liquidated from those vintage cars is going straight into their designated accounts. David sank back into his chair, the fight draining from his body entirely. He realized the profound poetic irony of the situation. He had sold his prized possessions not to pay off a greedy daughter, but to establish an inheritance for the grandchildren he had neglected. They were funding the exact lives they had tried to abandon. You tricked us, Patricia whispered, her voice hollow, devoid of its previous venom. You planned this from the very beginning. You set a trap. I did not set a trap, I corrected her. I built a mirror. I forced you to look at the consequences of your own actions. You assumed my time, my resources, and my empathy were free for the taking. You assumed you could use me as a disposable utility to shield Carter from his crimes. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together on the polished wood. I did not charge you for my time, Mother, I said calmly, delivering the final inescapable truth. I charged you for your audacity. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. She realized her own entitlement had written the invoice. If they had simply asked for help, if they had treated the children with compassion, none of this would have happened. Their arrogance had cost them everything. Gideon checked his wristwatch, projecting a flawless professional detachment. The bank teller on the first floor is expecting you, he noted. We will hold the lien release document here. Once the new check is deposited into the trust account, I will file the release with the county clerk. You have 45 minutes before the bank closes and the 30-day deadline expires. I suggest you hurry. My parents did not argue. The fight was over. The war was lost. David picked up the voided check, his hands trembling with a mixture of grief and profound defeat. He turned away, shuffling toward the heavy glass doors. Patricia lingered for a fraction of a second, looking at me, as if I were a stranger she had never met. In a way, she was right. The obedient, silent daughter she raised no longer existed. The woman sitting across from her was an architect of accountability, and the blueprints were flawless. She turned and followed her husband out of the room, the door sealing shut behind them. The debt was paid, the children were secured, and the toxic roots of my past were permanently severed. It is mid-November again. 1 full year has cycled since a silver luxury vehicle tore up my gravel driveway and abandoned 2 shivering children on my porch. The biting frost has returned to the bare maple trees outside my window, and the Vermont air carries the familiar, sharp scent of impending snow. Yet the atmosphere inside my restored 19th century farmhouse is entirely transformed. The heavy, suffocating silence that used to define my structured existence has been replaced by the vibrant, warm, and unapologetically messy rhythm of a real family. I am sitting at my heavy oak desk running Q4 tax compliance reports. A fire crackles steadily in the stone hearth behind me. The aroma of baked cinnamon and warm apples drifts in from the kitchen, where Emily is helping the twins prepare an after-school snack. The constant anxiety of corporate deadlines still exists, but it no longer rules my life. I was promoted to a principal partner at my firm this past spring. The forensic discipline required to untangle my family's financial deception honed my professional skills to a razor edge, proving that I thrive under pressure. However, the spreadsheets illuminating my dual monitors are no longer the most important part of my day. The legal and financial war I waged against my own bloodline concluded the moment that certified cashier check cleared Gideon's escrow account. I released the service lien honoring my end of the contract. My parents kept their home from going to public auction, but they could not keep their pride, and they certainly could not outrun the consequences of their predatory debt. Without my wallet to serve as a silent safety net, the crushing terms of their shadow mortgage caught up with them. Stripped of their liquid cash and burdened by exorbitant monthly interest payments, David and Patricia were forced to list their pristine four-bedroom colonial on the open market. They sold the sanctuary they had tried so hard to protect, using the proceeds to satisfy the private lender before he could seize the deed. Today, my parents reside in a cramped two-bedroom condominium situated on the ground floor of a noisy complex near a commercial shipping route. They live on a strict, miserable budget, clipping grocery coupons and arguing over utility bills. David drives a rusted, decade-old sedan instead of his polished, vintage Mustang. Their country club friends, the elite neighborhood gossips, and their affluent social circle eventually learned exactly why the vintage car collection vanished overnight. The truth about the forged public school residency documents and the stolen credit line leaked into the community. Social circles built on appearances do not tolerate the stench of federal fraud. My parents became social pariahs, isolated in their tiny apartment, entirely cut off from the daughter they tried to exploit and the grandchildren they neglected. As for the golden child, the universe did indeed provide, just not in the way he manifested on his social media broadcasts. The Securities and Exchange Commission concluded their investigation into his cryptocurrency holding company. Carter managed to avoid a lengthy federal prison sentence by cooperating with the authorities and forfeiting every single digital asset he possessed. However, the judge handed down a staggering civil restitution order. To avoid further criminal prosecution, Carter was mandated by the court to secure lawful, verifiable employment to begin paying back the retail investors he defrauded. The self-proclaimed crypto visionary who mocked the corporate matrix is now legally forced to clock into a standard minimum wage job. He works 40 hours a week at a retail electronics chain. He spends his days standing under harsh fluorescent lights, wearing a scratchy, bright blue polyester polo shirt with a corporate logo stitched over his chest. He sells extended warranties to angry customers forced to ask a shift supervisor for permission to take a 15-minute break. A significant portion of his meager paycheck is automatically garnished by the federal government. Furthermore, owing to his flight risk status and mounting legal penalties, the State Department revoked his passport. He will never book a first-class ticket to Indonesia again. He possesses no digital audience, no luxury aesthetic, and no leverage. The protective order Gideon filed remains in permanent effect, barring him from coming anywhere near my property or the children he treated as disposable props. The most profound victory, however, has nothing to do with the ruin of the people who tried to break me. The true victory is sitting at my kitchen island right now, laughing with a mouth full of apple slices. Mason is 7 years old. He plays defense in a local youth soccer league. He is loud, joyful, and he no longer flinches when a stainless steel spoon drops onto the hardwood floor. He has learned that accidents are just accidents, not invitations for cruel lectures or unpredictable wrath. He knows how to express frustration using his words, trusting that the adults in his life will listen without judgment. Harper recently brought home a glowing report card from the 2nd grade. When she smiles, the bright silver of her pediatric dental crowns catches the light, serving as a permanent testament to the intervention that saved her health. She takes piano lessons on Thursday afternoons, filling the farmhouse with clumsy but beautiful melodies. Her watercolor paintings are framed and displayed prominently in our hallway. They do not wear paper-thin designer windbreakers anymore. They wear thick, insulated waterproof gear, their cheeks rosy and flushed from building towering snow forts in the front yard. They are thriving. For the first time in their young lives, they are experiencing unconditional love, unshakable stability, and the quiet peace of a household governed by respect rather than chaos. I pause my typing, letting my hands rest on the smooth wooden edge of my desk. I look toward the corner of my workspace, where a silver picture frame sits next to a warm cup of black coffee. The photograph inside was taken last month at a local apple orchard. Mason is holding a woven basket overflowing with Honeycrisps. Harper is grinning, with a smear of sweet cider on her chin, and I am standing behind them, my arms wrapped securely around their small shoulders. My eyes trace the genuine happiness captured in their expressions, and then I shift my gaze, looking past the frame and addressing you directly. Society weaves a very dangerous, pervasive narrative. From a young age, we are conditioned to believe that shared genetics equate to an unbreakable moral contract. We are instructed to forgive the unforgivable, to absorb relentless disrespect, and to endure profound exploitation, all in the name of keeping the peace. We are told that family is everything, even when that family is actively holding our heads underwater. I spent the first 32 years of my life adhering to that narrative. I emptied my teenage savings to fix my brother's mistakes. I allowed my parents to treat my career, my home, and my financial security as a communal safety net. I set myself on fire, repeatedly, hoping the warmth would somehow earn their respect. It never did. It only taught them that my boundaries were suggestions and my resources were theirs for the taking. I learned the hard way that true predators do not lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes they sit at your dining room table, drinking your coffee, waiting for the perfect moment to steal your identity and dump their responsibilities onto your doorstep. But a ledger always balances. Every action carries a cost, and every debt eventually comes due. You do not have to accept the role of the silent victim simply because the people hurting you share your last name. You hold the pen. You control the narrative. You have the power to audit your own life, to identify the toxic liabilities, and to execute a permanent severance. Family is an action, not an obligation. Setting yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm is self-destruction. Sending them an invoice is self-respect. The frost on the Vermont maple trees has a way of silencing the world outside my farmhouse windows. As I sit by the hearth watching the amber embers of the fire pulse with a quiet, steady heat, I find myself reflecting on the profound wreckage and the beautiful reconstruction of the past year. Looking at Mason and Harper peacefully assembling a puzzle on the living room rug, I am struck by a deeply unsettling realization about the nature of the American family. We are sold a pristine, heavily marketed version of the American dream, a vision where a sprawling suburban home, 2 luxury cars in the driveway, and a fixed pension represent the ultimate pinnacle of successful parenting. But beneath that glossy veneer, a quiet rot often takes hold, destroying the very foundation of what a family is supposed to be. The story of my parents and my brother Carter is not just a tale of financial fraud and ultimate retaliation. It is a tragic masterclass in the catastrophic failures of modern parenting. In our culture, there is a pervasive, almost pathological desire to shield our children from discomfort, to pave their roads so smoothly that they never have to stumble. My parents built their entire identity around the illusion of Carter's success. They believed that by bailing him out of his mistakes, by funding his extravagant lifestyle, and by sacrificing my well-being to subsidize his arrogance, they were demonstrating unconditional love. But true parenting, rooted in the enduring values of a traditional family structure, requires something much more difficult than writing a check. It requires the courage to enforce consequences, Honesty and fairness are not just moral buzzwords. They are the architectural beams that keep a child's character from collapsing in on itself. By refusing to let Carter fail, my parents robbed him of the opportunity to develop resilience, accountability, and empathy. They transformed a child with potential into a hollow, desperate man who would ultimately abandon his own children on a freezing porch to protect his fabricated online aesthetic. They did not love him. They enabled a monster. And in doing so, they engineered their own tragic demise. When I look at the twins now, I see the delicate, profound responsibility of long-term guidance. The American ideal of raising children often gets lost in the pursuit of resume building, obsessing over which sports leagues they join or which designer clothes they wear to elementary school. Carter and his partner treated Mason and Harper like aesthetic props for social media, completely ignoring the fundamental duties of emotional awareness and basic care. I will never forget the visceral, heartbreaking flinch the twins exhibited when a simple stainless steel spoon hit the kitchen floor. That flinch was a physical manifestation of a home devoid of emotional safety. A traditional family structure is not defined by the perfection of the people within it, nor is it defined by a rigid adherence to a specific demographic shape. It is defined by the unwavering commitment to provide a safe, predictable harbor. It is built on the quiet, unglamorous moments, cutting toast into triangles, offering a 10-minute warning before a schedule change, and kneeling on the floor to explain that a loud noise is just an accident, not an invitation for a screaming match. Raising children demands an acute emotional awareness, a willingness to see the world through their terrified, hopeful eyes, and the steadfast discipline to teach them that they are worthy of respect, both from others and from themselves. As I guided Mason and Harper out of the shadows of their father's neglect, I realized that true family responsibility sometimes requires a ruthlessness that society refuses to understand. We are conditioned by movies, holidays, and sentimental platitudes to believe that blood is an unbreakable covenant. We are told that we must forgive our parents, that we must support our siblings, and that to turn our backs on our bloodline is the ultimate moral failure. But what happens when that bloodline is the very thing holding your head underwater? If you have ever found yourself setting boundaries that others call cruel, or if you have ever had to become the villain in someone else's story just to protect your own peace, you are not alone. Please take a moment to subscribe and follow Intimately Told Stories. We share these journeys because there is immense power in realizing that the darkest chapters of our lives are often the ones that teach us how to finally break free. Join our community and share your own reflections in the comments below. The greatest lesson I learned from the ashes of my parents' suburban empire is one that directly contradicts everything we are taught about the sanctity of the family tree. We are instructed to water our roots no matter how toxic the soil has become. We are told to keep giving, keep forgiving, and keep fixing the unfixable. But looking at the life I have built, a life paid for by the audacity of those who tried to break me, I see the world differently. I look out at the dark, snow-covered woods beyond my property line, and I wonder how many people are currently sitting in the freezing cold of their own lives, waiting for a warmth from their family that is never going to come. How many of us are holding on to the ghost of a mother or a brother, hoping that if we just sacrifice a little more of our own light, they will finally see us. Perhaps the most profound act of love you can offer a child is to show them how to walk away from the people who hurt them, even if those people share their last name. Society tells us that a broken family is a tragedy that must be repaired at all costs. I disagree. Sometimes the destruction of your family is not a tragedy at all. It is a rescue mission. Sometimes the bravest, most deeply moral decision you can ever make is to strike the match and burn the diseased family tree to the ground and use the light of the fire to guide yourself home.